In the end, none of the 40 colossal ships had been lost. Some received moderate damage to their hulls, but the high compartmentalization and the rugged engineering of the war vessels prevented them from going down. As the fleet escaped the vast blot of black water, it continued moving south without ever slowing down. In fact, the reactors were sent into a controlled overload to enhance the speed of the convoy even further and quickly increase the distance between it and the latent danger. As the battered ships cut the waves, thousands of crewmates were assigned to repair brigades that started patching up the torn sections of the hulls. None of them paid any attention to the fact that the fleet was still in transit, hinting that this precarious type of work was not new to them. The rows of cannons were checked and reloaded. New missiles and torpedoes were slotted into the empty nests. The wounded were moved to infirmaries, and the dead were given burials at sea. Despite the frightening scope of the battle, not too many humans had lost their lives. Things could have been different if the Awakened of the House of Night had not acted so swiftly. A few days later, Sunny was resting in the officer's lounge of the scarred battleship as he chatted with Master Naeve. Since there were no other Ascended stationed on the vessel, the two sometimes kept each other company.
Anyway, the giant just whacked the creepy skull with his hammer. Boom. Let me tell you, at that moment, I was glad that my pants were already wet. I don't know if that thing died or not, but it did not bother us after that.
The scion of the great clan looked at him with an amused expression.
The dark sea of the Forgotten Shore has to be a great titan then, at least.
Sunny shrugged.
That is what I think as well, but who can say for sure? That whole place is weird.
He hesitated for a moment and then asked,
Do you think that it is connected to the black water? What is that thing anyway?
Naeve's expression dimmed a little.
Well, no one really knows. We have stumbled on the black water many times, both in the real world and in the dream realm. It is one of the more prominent hazards in the storm sea. Some think that it is a type of nightmare creature. Some think that it is a powerful terror that had been torn into numerous pieces thousands of years ago. Some even think that is the blood of an ancient, long-dead titan.
He shook his head and sighed.
In any case, everyone agrees that it is best to avoid it. The black water is not really sentient, so hiding from it is not too hard. It's just that this convoy is too damn large. There are too many souls, too many awakened. Their scent attracted it, as well as all the abominations that dwell within it. Luckily, most of them were not too powerful this time.
The handsome master thought for a bit.
I don't think that the black water is the same as the dark sea of the Forgotten Shore, though. They seem similar on the surface, but that sea of yours is much more vast and powerful. It is a miracle that you and your friends managed to seal it as mere sleepers.
Sunny glanced at Naeve with a somber expression.
It was not a miracle. Countless thousands of young men and women had died on the Forgotten Shore across 2 decades to uncover the secrets that eventually allowed us to seal the Dark Sea. Many of them would have been pillars of humanity by now if they had survived. We just finished what they had started.
The First Lord and his cohort, the members of the Dream Army, even Gunlog and his lieutenants. If not for their contributions, Nephi's and Sunny would have never been able to lay siege to the Crimson Spire and conquer it. The scion of the House of Night sighed.
Most problems can be solved if you throw enough bodies at them. Hopefully, the Antarctica campaign will be different.
It had to be, considering that no amount of bodies would have been enough to bury a problem of that magnitude. Sunny grimaced.
How long before we reach it anyway?
Naeve shifted slightly and smiled.
Conditions are good, if all goes well, a week at most.
Then he leaned forward and added,
Oh, by the way, I just received the news. The government is going to be announcing the voluntary mobilization in the next couple of days. The second evacuation army will already be starting to form by the time you guys make landfall.
Sunny gave him a dubious look.
That's great. I doubt that it will arrive to reinforce us anytime soon, though. Things like that take a lot of time, not to mention that the best and the brightest that the government has to offer are already aboard these ships. With the legacy clans remaining on the sidelines, the reinforcements are not going to change much.
The Nightwalker shrugged.
I wouldn't be so sure that the legacy clans won't join on the fun.
Sunny frowned.
I've been told that neither Song nor Valor are interested in participating in the campaign. And while you guys are helping out, the House of Night is not going to send its land troops either.
Naeve lingered for a moment.
My clan is most useful at sea. As for the other two, indeed, they have only sent token forces to the First Army. They are acting reluctant, for now.
He shook his head.
However, don't let their act fool you. The legacies are definitely going to join the fight. They might not come in the first wave or even the second, but they will come.
Sunny looked at him unconvinced.
What makes you say that?
The handsome master simply smiled.
Have you ever met a legacy that could resist joining a glorious fight?
He leaned back and let out a laugh.
Especially when there are countless treasures, advancements, and spoils of all kinds to be made in the fight.
Sunny's expression darkened. Legacies were known to pursue power and opportunity, indeed. If the two remaining great clans did really join the Antarctica campaign, the army would be relieved of a large part of its burden. However, with what he knew about the conflict between Song and Valor, would they be joining the struggle against the chain of nightmares to help humanity? Or would they be joining it, simply, because Antarctica could become the most convenient battlefield for their own private war? The great clans may be waiting for their moment, but you should not wait for yours. Subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next episode. Now, let us return to the story. As the naval convoy moved closer and closer to Antarctica, Sunny had to accelerate his attempts to weave new and better enchantments into the memories of his soldiers. Although his rudimentary knowledge of sorcery was not nearly enough to create something truly powerful, he did manage to comprehensively upgrade the cohort's arsenal. Even if the modifications he had made were mostly modest, they were all targeted and suited the tasks facing the first irregular company. While Sunny failed to make the memories considerably stronger, he succeeded in tailoring them to the situation and, more importantly, to their users. This was already enough. Now, many of the memories that his subordinates wielded looked rather peculiar to his eyes. If he were to touch them and peer deep inside, he would see strange weaves that combined the usual strings of ethereal light with the lightless threads made of shadow essence. The sight reminded Sunny of himself and Nephi's. And speaking of changing star, a few days before the fleet reached Antarctica, the world was shaken by an emergency announcement transmitted by the government. Of course, the propaganda machine managed to present the approaching cataclysm in an easily digestible and inspiring light. It was almost as if the chain of nightmares was going to be a glorious stage for heroism, valiance, and human triumph, instead of a bloody, unmitigated disaster. However, no matter how hard the government tried, people weren't that easy to fool. Although nothing much changed for the soldiers of the first evacuation army, Sunny was sure that a wave of panic was spreading through the rest of the world. The population centers of the southern quadrant were, of course, hit the worst. He could not even imagine what the people living there were going through. But other continents had to be consumed by fear as well. If something like that could happen in Antarctica, then it could happen anywhere else. The infrastructure was bound to come under terrible strain when hundreds of millions of refugees from the besieged continent arrived. If they could even be saved, what if the evacuation failed? How did people living in South America feel, knowing that they would soon be cut off from the rest of humanity? One was left unaffected by the shocking news. Nephi's and the rest of the cohort had to have seen the announcement as well. Knowing that the next few weeks were going to be extremely turbulent, Sunny retreated into his cabin, spent some time establishing a new tether, and then closed his eyes. It took him several minutes of intense concentration to grasp the elusive sensation of the dream realm anchor. Then he circulated his essence in a swift, complicated pattern and disappeared. Cabin was suddenly silent and empty. All that remained was a slight, eerie feeling of coldness that permeated the air. The ivory tower did not change much in the many months since Sunny last visited his current citadel, at least on the outside. Well, what did he expect? The Great Pagoda remained the same for thousands of years, so why would it suddenly change now? The Fire Keepers might have made it their home, but they were hardly capable of reshaping the ancient structure. The island itself, however, looked a bit different. To his surprise, Sunny noticed a large garden surrounded by a neat and tidy wooden fence. Inside, various vegetables were growing in the soil. There were also several other structures here and there, all built of wood. Some seemed like they were meant for training, some resembled simple barns. They all looked rather harmonious.
That's probably Kaor's and Shakti's handiwork.
The two members of Cassie's former cohort had used to be artisans in the Bright Castle. One was an awakened carpenter, the other Kaido's disciple with an aspect related to plants. The Ivory Island looked much more inhabited now. More than that, a familiar ship rested on the surface of the lake. Despite thousands of years that had passed since its former captain disappeared, the flying vessel remained much the same. Sunny sighed. He had been rather taken by the rhino. But now, looking at the graceful lines of the ancient ship's hull, he couldn't help but feel that the armored APC was rather small and shabby.
Whatever, it has better plumbing anyway. That's what really matters.
Somewhat vindicated, Sunny allowed himself to enjoy the peace and tranquility of the beautiful island for a few moments, and then headed toward the tower. As he did, a thundering voice boomed behind him. He slowed down and then cautiously turned around. Effie was traversing the green meadow with long strides. Her eyes were burning with intense emotion.
Zoe.
A second before the huntress reached him, a swift shadow flew across the grass, and Kai suddenly landed on the ground. The archer seemed concerned.
Sunny.
Effie growled, interrupting him.
What the hell, Sunny? Antarctica, that was your big secret. You up and left to go to war without telling us.
Sunny stared at them for a few moments and then cleared his throat.
Actually, it's Captain Sunless to you citizens. Please maintain some decorum.
Effie's eye twitched. Before the huntress did something that one or both of them would regret, Sunny raised his arms.
All right. Yeah, I am currently in the southern quadrant. It wasn't my secret to tell, okay? The government is very particular about classified information, you know.
He lingered for a moment and then added.
Besides, it's not like you can't join me. The Second Army would be very glad to get its hands on two renowned masters. The life of service is not for the faint of heart, of course, but the benefits are to die for.
The huntress stared at him in stunned silence. Finally, she palmed her face and said,
Doofus, no sorry, Captain Doofus, are you really giving us the recruitment speech?
Sunny looked her up and down and grinned.
Well, not really, however, I do think that the uniform will suit you very much.
For a few moments, there was an awkward silence between the three of them. Eventually, Sunny sighed.
Listen, it is what it is. I have my own reasons to join the campaign in the Southern Quadrant. Both of you are smart enough to realize that the picture painted by the government is far removed from the truth. The truth is that Antarctica is going to be a disaster, and no one, not even masters like us, can guarantee their survival, so you have to decide for yourself.
He looked at Effie and Kine with a heavy expression and added,
If you decide to join the Second Army, do it for a good reason. Do it for yourself, your desires, your principles. Point is, whatever you do, definitely don't do it for me. Chances are that we won't meet even if you ship to Antarctica. It's a big place, you know.
His friends stared at him with unreadable expressions. A few moments later, Kai shook his head with a subtle smile.
Thank you very much for caring, Sunny, but you don't have to remind us, really. We both have good heads on our shoulders. We are more than qualified to make prudent decisions.
Effie nodded.
Exactly. If anyone should be giving sage advice here, it's us. We're older than you, and also, it's pointless anyway because we have already enlisted.
Sunny blinked.
Are you what?
The huntress grinned and patted him on the shoulder.
What did you think, that we would miss our chance to fight an apocalyptic horde of nightmare creatures? Dream on, buddy. Both Kai and I were among the first ones to submit our applications to the recruitment bureau.
He stared at her for a second, then rubbed his temples.
Wait, you did. Why?
Effie and Kai glanced at each other and shrugged. The archer was the first one to respond.
Because there are hundreds of millions of people that need help. Is this not reason enough?
The huntress shook her head.
Because I am a warrior, when an enemy invades your home, you don't hide. You go to war and kick the enemy's butt. We humans need to protect what's ours. If we can't even do that much, then we won't be humans for much longer. We'll just be food.
Sunny studied their faces, then scratched the back of his head.
All right, I guess that makes sense. Welcome aboard then. With your power and abilities, the Second Army is probably salivating over your applications right now. Chances are you guys are going to outrank me very soon.
Prudent decisions, huh? Doubtful. As they walked toward the ivory tower, he shared some details about the operation with them, including the disposition of human forces, the intended phases of the campaign, and his own role as a captain of the first irregular company. As he did, both Effie and Kai grew a little pensive.
Yeah, I am not sure that the government can actually pull it off. Even if we maintain control over the evacuation centers, repelling the siege of the nightmare creatures for months won't be easy. It would be a miracle if we hold out for a year, but can the fleets even evacuate everyone in a year?
Sunny hesitated for a moment, then tentatively nodded.
That is the plan, the ships. They are massive. The naval convoy I'm currently at is carrying 100,000 soldiers, but that is only because most of the space is taken by the war machines, supplies, and all the logistical stuff needed to support a massive army. On its way back, the same convoy can carry millions upon millions of refugees. There are more convoys than that one too, so a year is not an unrealistic goal, actually. It's more than most projections suggest.
His face grew darker.
However, that is only if the convoys don't meet obstacles of their own, so who can say? I doubt that these projections will survive coinciding against reality.
Kai sighed.
It seems that the Second Army won't be ready to deploy anytime soon. By the time we arrive in Antarctica, the situation might be entirely out of control. Many things can go wrong in a few months.
Sunny shared the same sentiment.
For what it's worth, I don't expect the worst to happen before you guys have the chance to experience it personally. The chain of nightmares is going to be ramping up as time goes on as well, so you'll have plenty of opportunities to live through the truly terrible parts.
They entered the ivory tower, where Hope had once been imprisoned. As always, Sunny felt a subtle shiver run through his body and soul when he saw the great hall where he had faced the ineffable demon. Now, Hope's former prison cell served as the heart of the human citadel. The 7 broken chains lay on the ground, forming the wide borders of the circle that served as the gateway. Myriads of runes glowed softly on their surface. The fire keepers made their home on the upper levels of the great pagoda, so the first level was mostly empty. Only a couple of them were here, busy with chores. Noticing Sunny, they greeted him with excited smiles.
Weirdos.
Sunny waved at them, then turned to Effie and Kai.
By the way, where's Nephi's? Has she arrived?
Getting Changing Star to the ivory tower was a complicated process. She had to travel to the sanctuary of Noctis first, which demanded cooperation from the saint that had replaced Sky Tide as the person in charge of the Chained Isles. After that, the fire keepers had to fly their ship all the way from the ebony tower to the surface, pick her up, and return into the depths of the sky below. However, it had not escaped his notice that the flying ship had somehow ended up on the ivory island itself. Had the fire keepers found a way to brave the crushing? Kai nodded.
She reached the tower a couple of days ago. It didn't take as long as we thought. With Noctis' help, Cassie had studied the flying ship extensively in the nightmare. I don't know how exactly, but she managed to repair its enchantment circuits enough to move directly between here and the Isles. The process is a bit precarious, but the travel time between here and the sanctuary was cut by several weeks.
Sunny lingered for a moment and then sighed.
Well, where can I find her?
Effie gave him a long look and gestured back to the gates that they had walked through.
She's there by the lake. Do you want to say hi?
Sunny took a deep breath.
Yeah, something like that.
Leaving the great pagoda, Sunny glanced warily at the bones of Severax the ivory dragon, whom Kai had slain in the nightmare, and slowly headed for the lake. Its surface was calm and clear as always. Sunlight reflected from the tranquil waters, making it seem like a pool of shimmering silver. Despite the beauty of the heavenly lake, Sunny couldn't help but feel a hint of unease as he approached it. The memory of the furious naval battle was still fresh in his mind. So no body of water felt safe. On the shore, an intricate bench cut from white stone stood, inviting people to rest and enjoy the idyllic view. Currently, it was occupied by a familiar figure. Naeve sat with her legs crossed, staring at the sparkling water with a distant look. When Sunny's shadow fell on her, she lingered for a moment and then looked up.
Sunny.
He remained silent for a while, then sat on the bench and studied the beautiful lake as well.
How's life treating you? Being adopted into a great clan has to be a weird experience.
Naeve frowned.
It's fine. Feels a bit strange to be addressed as sister by Morgan of Valor, I guess. She seems to enjoy my discomfort.
Considering who Morgan's other sibling was, she probably put a different meaning into the word sister, one that entirely lacked affection, most likely. For a moment, Sunny was darkly amused.
Never thought I would pity the Princess of War one day, but having both Mordred and Naeve as siblings, damn, her luck must be even worse than mine, if that's even possible.
Changing Star let out a heavy sigh and turned slightly to face him.
You should have told me, Sunny.
He smiled.
What about Antarctica? Oh, that was classified information. I thought that Cassie would have informed you anyway. She had to have known, right?
She studied him for a few moments, then shook her head.
If she did, she kept the knowledge to herself. Cassie has changed a lot since the Forgotten Shore. She carries a lot of secrets.
Sunny raised an eyebrow.
I guess there's trouble in paradise.
I was under the impression that she's utterly loyal to you, like a lost puppy, you know. It's surprising to hear. Changing Star did not respond immediately. After a while, she said,
Cassie has her own thoughts and her own desires. She is powerful, too, no less than the rest of us. Brushing her agency aside would be a mistake.
Sunny laughed.
Of all the people in the world, I would be the last one to underestimate Cassie, don't you think?
Naeve simply looked at the lake.
Are you safe?
He lingered for a bit, then shrugged.
Is anyone safe? I am surrounded by thousands of soldiers, awakened masters, and even a few saints, plus I'm me. Antarctica is no worse than the Forgotten Shore or the Kingdom of Hope. In fact, if anyone is in danger, it's you. Are you safe?
Her face grew dark. Naeve gritted her teeth for a moment, and then said with unusual intensity,
You don't understand, do you? This is not the first expedition of that kind. Humanity has tried to resist the spell before, the last attempt. The last one took the lives of both my grandfather and my mother. They were powerful, too. They were exceptional and ahead of their time, too. What makes you think that you'll do better than them?
Sunny shook his head.
Many things have changed in the past 2 decades. Back then, humanity had much less awakened. There were barely any masters around. No saint had even emerged yet, at least officially. Our tech, spell tech, and strategies were much more primitive. We had no experience dealing with something like that. Yes, North America was a disaster, but we learned our lesson there. This campaign, it will be different. It will be better. I will survive it and grow stronger as a result.
Naeve looked at him with a challenge.
Says who?
He smiled.
I do. I say if I die or not. It all depends on me, does it not?
Sunny sighed and glanced at the radiant lake.
The nightmare creatures don't scare me. The chain of nightmares doesn't scare me either. If there's one thing that does, however, it's the great clans and their ambitions. Will they really come to Antarctica to start a war of their own?
A troubled expression appeared on Changing Star's face. She hesitated before giving him an answer.
Eyes don't know. Maybe it is a perfect opportunity.
His own face grew ugly.
Why are they doing it now? This is insanity. Our civilization is already on its last leg.
Nephis lingered for a while, then sighed.
There has to be a logic to their actions, but what is it? I am not sure. All of it is very strange. We are missing something, I think. A key piece of information that can explain everything. The sovereigns. They never do anything without a reason.
Sunny scoffed.
Is there something you are sure of?
She looked at him and said in a serious tone.
There is one thing.
Changing Star remained silent for a moment, distant flames dancing in her cold gray eyes.
When the great clans do come to Antarctica, all of us better be ready.
Several days later, Sunny ascended to the upper deck of the colossal battleship and walked over to its bow. The guards stationed here and there on the deck let him pass freely, both because of the 3 stars on the shoulder insignia of his black bodysuit and his close relationship with Naeve of House Knight, their direct superior. Stopping in the shadow of a massive cannon turret, Sunny endured the cold winds that pelted him with drops of icy water and looked ahead. In front of him were the towering hulls of other metal leviathans of the naval convoy, which cut the waves as they sailed toward a distant horizon. And out there, on the horizon, a dark line slowly appeared, finally putting an end to the vast expanse of undulating water, Antarctica. After several tumultuous weeks at sea, the fleet had reached its destination. Perched precariously on a broken mountain road, the Rhino stood still as the members of the cohort cautiously climbed higher. Belle, Dorn, and Luster were hiding 100 steps ahead, just below the crest of the tall hill, while Sunny and Kim were currently on the roof of the armored vehicle.
Oh, I see them.
Samara was tensely studying the screen of her military communicator, which was receiving the video feed from a compact spy drone that she had sent ahead. On it was a small valley. The image was grainy and noisy, sometimes breaking out entirely because of the interference of the nightmare gate exerted on it. Flooding the valley, a swarm of nightmare creatures could be seen. There are hundreds of them. Most are awakened, but there are several fallen abominations as well. The gate guardian has already emerged. It seems to be a devil. Sunny nodded.
Correct. There are 274 abominations, of them 242 are awakened, while 32 are fallen. The guardian is indeed a fallen devil.
One of his shadows had snuck much closer to the swarm of nightmare creatures. It wasn't suffering from any interference as well. Sunny, however, maintaining a calm facade, he shivered inwardly. The gate was whispering into his ears, calling to him on a level much deeper than thought or emotion. He had experienced the call before, but now that he was a master, it became so much stronger and harder to resist. Sunny had experienced this change almost instantly after the first evacuation army made landfall in Antarctica, while the other 3 convoys were sent to East Antarctica, the largest and most populated region of the southern quadrant. The one he had traveled with was meant to deliver troops to the Antarctic Center. The Antarctic Center was a long, narrow, mountainous landmass that served as the administrative and industrial center of the continent. As such, it harbored many priority targets that had to be evacuated at all costs. The first several days after the arrival of the army was pure chaos. The large city they entered, Falcon Scott, was in a state of utter havoc. Millions of people had just learned that their entire lives would be uprooted, or maybe even lost, while the local government forces had done their best to maintain order and prepare the civilians for evacuation. That did not amount to much in the end. The situation had been only made worse by all the gates that were opening near and within the city. As one of the Southern Quadrant Awakened had put it, it used to be that one gate opened every few weeks. Then, it was one every week, then several a week, then one every day. By the time the evacuation army arrived, the situation was swiftly growing even worse. With so many gates around every awakened master, and Saint felt their call some more than others, it wasn't easy for Sunny to adjust to this new, subtly maddening reality. He wouldn't be surprised if the prolonged exposure to the call drove many people insane. But they had not reached that point yet. Even if the world seemed to have lost its mind, after spending several days in the panicked chaos consuming Falcon Scott, a large chunk of the Army Corps stayed behind to start converting it into an impregnable fortress. The northernmost city of the Antarctic Center was going to serve as its largest evacuation center, so it had to be converted into a full-fledged siege capital in the coming months. Most of the government forces, however, moved out and started their long march south. Their job was to reach other population centers, establish safe evacuation corridors, and start moving civilians through them to the handful of siege capitals. The first irregular company left with the field army and split up to assist its various divisions. And now, just a day later, Sunny's cohort was going to fight its first battle. The division they were escorting was already engaged in a low-intensity confrontation against a mass of nightmare creatures that had emerged from half a dozen gates at the lower altitudes. To wipe the abominations faster, they needed to flank them, but the most suitable road skirted the mountain slopes and was itself blocked by the 7th gate. Deploying soldiers to fight on such rough terrain was problematic, so the irregulars were sent instead. Standing on the roof of the Rhino, Sunny sighed.
We are in luck.
Both Samara and Kim turned and stared at him with inscrutable expressions. After a few moments of dead silence, the latter said in a timid voice, "I am sorry, sir, but how can facing 300 nightmare creatures and a fallen devil be called luck?" He shrugged.
That is what I call a low-threat gate. Do you have a guess why?
Samara frowned. Because there's no tyrant. Sunny nodded with a smile.
Indeed, sure, there are a lot of abominations, but without a tyrant or a terror to control them, they're just a herd. Things would have been much, much worse if all these creatures could coordinate their attack. Plus, we're smarter. That means that we can stack the odds in our favor.
She lingered for a moment. I think the odds are already in our favor. We have higher ground, and the wind is blowing in the right direction. The nightmare creatures have not caught our scent yet, which means that the element of surprise is on our side. Sunny shook his head.
Don't be fooled. They already know that we're here. Abominations have other ways of sensing human flesh and souls. In fact, they would not have stayed put near the gate unless they were up to something in the first place. They would have spread around and tried to find something to tear apart and devour.
Kim shivered. Then, what are they waiting for? He glanced at her with an amused expression.
Isn't it obvious? They're waiting for us to walk into the trap. That fallen devil is much smarter than it looks.
Sunny's expression hardened.
Which is why it has to die first.
Samara studied the screen of her communicator for a few moments and sighed. I can probably make the shot from this distance, but we don't have a direct line of fire. The crest of the hill that hides us from sight also protects the enemy from ranged attacks. Sunny's smile turned into a dark grin.
That is true as far as your rifle goes.
A swarm of scarlet sparks shimmered into existence around his hand, and then a black bow appeared in it, radiating a feeling of devastating strength. Its string was bright red, and there was a small brand of the same color on one of its limbs, in the shape of an anvil pierced by a straight sword.
But arrows, unlike bullets, do not have to fly in a straight line.
Sunny studied the swarm of abominations that flooded the small valley. These ones didn't seem as dangerous as the primal hunters he had once fought in front of Rain's school. The creatures had bestial bodies, with 4 bony limbs that ended in sharp claws and long, slithering tails. Ridges of jagged spikes rose from their spines, and their maws were full of sharp fangs. Most disturbingly, all except for the fallen ones seemed to have had their eyes violently torn out. Now, only darkness nestles in the empty, gaping holes of their eye sockets. The abominations did not move as if they were blind, though. There was a strange, predatory precision to their subdued motions. The devil was different from the eyeless beasts, though. It resembled them outwardly but possessed a more humanoid body. The creature stood on its hind legs while his front limbs resembled human hands. Its eyes were closed and even seemed sewn shut. Something constantly moved behind the eyelids. Giving Sunny the creeps, the powerful abomination towered above its ilk, reaching almost 3 meters in height. 274 nightmare creatures was a lot. Most cohorts of Awakened would not have even considered attacking that many abominations and quietly retreated instead.
I need to be careful about this.
Sunny thought for a few long moments and then spoke.
Samara, move forward and assume a position higher up the slope where you'll be able to shoot over the crest of the road. Vanguard, prepare to advance and secure the crest. Kimmy, work your magic.
His words reached the melee fighters of the cohort without any problem. Of course, he could have used the usual technological solutions to ensure good communication. But with how unstable tech was near Nightmare Gates, it was always good to have a backup. For that reason, Luster was currently in possession of an extremely ordinary, very unassuming rock, which nevertheless was somehow able to speak with their captain's voice. One of Sunny's shadows was following the vanguard as well, so he had no trouble hearing their responses. As the cohort's range specialist hoisted the heavy rifle on her shoulder and jumped down off the rhino, the melee vanguard crept forward. Quentin served as the center of the formation, with Bell and Dorn flanking him. Luster stayed behind, to cover their backs and prevent any monsters from escaping toward the rhino. He was confidently wielding a beautifully etched halberd in his hands, which both gave him some range, and allowed the young man to support the 3 fighters from the back should the need arise. Its versatility also gave him a lot of options on how to engage the enemy. During the past weeks, Sunny had done all he could to raise the battle effectiveness of the cohort and enhance the memories of his soldiers. The weapons received most of his attention, but he also augmented their armors by transplanting the tenacious enchantment of the Patient Avenger into their weaves. With its help, the survivability of the cohort had reached a new level. The Patient Avenger itself had been entrusted to Quentin. Sunny also transferred the Blood Blossom to Bell, with much reluctance of course. With his current strength, the augmentation granted by the morbid charm could not benefit him in any substantial way. It was a different story for the awakened swordsman, however, so the decision, sadly, made too much sense. Each member of the cohort was additionally protected by a charm that gave them slight resistance to cold, which is why they were able to all but ignore the slowly falling snow and the chilling wind that blew through the mountains. Standing near Sunny on the roof of the rhino, Kim, who was wielding a round buckler, a sharp rapier, and had a snub-nosed automatic carbine slung around her back, concentrated and unleashed her ability. First, she borrowed Sunny's sight. This also allowed her to see what his shadows saw, even though receiving so many different perspectives put an immense strain on her mind. Then, she used her dormant ability to concentrate on the fallen devil and find its weaknesses. Finally, she shared her own perception back to Sunny, allowing him to see where to strike as well. The shadows did not see color, so to him, the body of the towering abomination became painted in different shades of gray. The lighter areas were the most resilient, while those that were darker were less protected. Strangely enough, a small spot at the very center of the devil's forehead was almost entirely black. That was where Sunny aimed. As he wrapped 2 shadows around his body and strained his muscles, the black bow bent, despite possessing an enchantment called Unbending. Because of it, Morgan's warbow required a giant strength to draw, but was also capable of sending arrows very far and translated devastating force to them. Luckily, Sunny was incredibly strong, even for a master. A ghostly shade appeared on the string of the bow and then turned into a black arrow with dark fletching a narrow arrowhead that seemed to have been crafted from a long, sharp piece of obsidian. The shadow arrows were swift, flew without producing any sound, and had an unnatural ability to find cracks in the enemy's armor. Sunny closed his eyes and moved the bow higher, aiming at an abomination that was more than a kilometer away and was only seen by his shadow was not an easy task, but he had not trained with Kai for nothing. He held his breath, and then corrected his aim by a couple millimeters when the wind suddenly picked up. Lastly, Sunny poured his essence into the bow, instantly emptying one of his 4 cores. The Death Dealer enchantment was a gluttonous one as far as essence was concerned, but it was worth it. A moment later, Sunny relaxed his fingers, allowing the string to slide off them on its own. The black arrow noiselessly disappeared into the sky so fast that it was hard to see it at all. It arched above the crest of the road, soared high, and then fell down. The fallen devil might have still dodged if it knew what was coming, but the shadow arrow was so swift and silent that the abomination never stood a chance. A black streak flashed in the air, piercing the center of the gate guardian's forehead with stunning ease and exiting from the back of its head a split second later. The devil's eyes suddenly opened, revealing. Sunny never learned what had been hiding behind the creature's eyelids, because a moment after his shadow arrow disappeared into the ground, the creature's entire skull suddenly deformed and violently exploded. Every bone in its upper body was shattered by the residual force of the impact. The misshapen, headless corpse was thrown back with so much momentum that it killed several nightmare creatures that just happened to stand in the way. Just like that. The fallen devil who guarded the nightmare gate was gone. All members of his cohort froze for a moment, astonished by the ghastly sight. The nightmare creatures seemed to have been stunned by the sudden and gruesome death of their leader as well. Standing on top of the rhino, Sunny lowered his bow and smiled with vicious glee.
Not a bad start.
A second later, the small valley exploded with movements as hundreds of abominations lunged in the direction from which the black arrow had arrived.
You have slain a fallen devil, defiled witness. Your shadow grows stronger. You have received a memory.
A swarm of fearsome nightmare creatures flowed up the slope of the small mountain valley, rushing toward the crest of the road, where a handful of awakened warriors were preparing to make their stand. The eyeless abominations were moving with ferocious determination, covering many meters with each stride as viscous saliva streamed from their terrifying maws. To their right was the slope of the mountain, while to their left was a canyon that grew deeper and deeper as the road climbed up. Standing at the top of the hill, Quentin Bell Dorn and Luster studied the approaching avalanche of monsters with grim apprehension. Lowering the enchanted sledgehammer off his shoulder, the striker of the melee vanguard glanced at his comrades and spoke in a reserved tone, asking what they thought. Bell readied his sword and smiled, saying that this was going to be fun, and that if they survived, he wouldn't have to be embarrassed about sleeping through the last one anymore. Quentin silently shook his head, while Luster, who stood behind the 3, closed his eyes for a moment. Crazy bastard. The swordsman simply laughed. At that moment, they heard a subtle electric whine and then a loud crack of a highly compressed sonic boom. A moment later, the head of a hulking abomination that towered above the rest of the swarm exploded into bloody chunks. The massive carcass toppled over like a marionette that had its strings cut, instantly turning into a lifeless heap of twitching meat. Standing on the roof of the rhino, Sunny drew his bow and let an arrow fly.
Keep aiming for their foreheads, Samara. Take down as many fallen as you can before the enemy reaches the 200 meters mark, then switch to explosive ammunition and concentrate on the front rows of the awakened abominations. We must break their momentum.
Hidden between large rocks higher up the slope, the deadly sharpshooter recharged her coilgun as she poured a steady flow of essence into an armor-piercing tungsten slug. Understood. A heartbeat later, the rifle whined again and another abomination fell to the ground. At the same time, a black arrow pierced the head of an especially frightening creature. This time, the effect was not as drastic, but the eyeless horror was killed just the same. Drawing the unbending warbow once more, Sunny briefly frowned.
Too slow.
They had barely 24 seconds left before the swarm reached the melee vanguard. That was not nearly enough to kill all the remaining fallen abominations, and then there were the 240 awakened ones left as well. Sunny and Samara would just had to do their best. Standing by his side, Kim nervously grasped the grip of her carbine and checked its magazine, which was loaded with bullets that seemed to glow slightly in the dim twilight. Each had been charged by Samara prior to the battle. Sadly, the supply of this powerful rounds was limited. The bullets slowly lost their charge as time went by, so the cohort could not hoard them. Black arrows rained from the sky, reaping one life after another. Head after head exploded, turning the cracked asphalt on the mountain road slick with blood. A fearsome nightmare creatures fell almost every second as the number of the fallen abominations slowly dwindled. At some point, Samara shifted her aim to the mass of the rabid eyeless beasts. Her eyes shone with ethereal light as a different kind of bullet escaped from the thick barrel of the Gauss rifle with a thunderous roar. In the next moment, a powerful explosion tore through the front row of the rushing swarm. A dozen abominations were instantly ripped apart. Chunks of mangled flesh flew into the air in a cloud of bloody haze. Sharp shards of broken bones pelted the surrounding creatures like shrapnel, wounding and maiming them. Almost instantly after the disfigured corpses fell to the ground, the sound of another thunderous explosion rolled over the mountains, and then another. 2 more bloody rifts appeared in the mass of the frenzied abominations. Now that Samara didn't have to aim, her rate of fire increased. However, so did her consumption of soul essence.
That's enough. Conserve your essence and switch back to priority targets.
Sunny felled another fallen creature and drew the black bow again. However, this time, a different arrow appeared on its string. Instead of wood and metal, it seemed to be made of pure lightning. Just a couple of seconds before the first nightmare creatures reached the crest of the hill, a furious bolt of lightning fell from above, augmented by the Death Dealer enchantment and 2 of Sunny's shadows. The strike of thunder instantly turned the abomination it hit into a cloud of swiftly dissipating ash. Then, powerful currents of electricity arced to the nearest beasts, spreading through the swarm in a destructive chain reaction. Because the monsters were so close to each other, the lightning spread far and wide. It grew weaker with each jump, but still, the damage it dealt was devastating. Sunny failed to count how many abominations he had killed, but it had to be several dozens at least. Even more were burned and wounded to various degrees. But he wasn't done yet. A moment after the lightning chained through the swarm, the shadows cast by large rocks suddenly surged forward and shot into the air, turning into long, vicious spikes. The nightmare creatures that had tried to leave the road and climb higher were either pierced or blocked by them, turning the slope of the mountain into a macabre forest of impaled bodies, with the deadly spikes blocking the slope and the deep canyon on the other side. The swarm had no other choice than to attack along the narrow line of the road. Funneled that way, and with their momentum broken, the abominations that had jumped over the corpses of their slain kin failed to overwhelm the melee vanguard of the cohort in one fell swoop. As Quinettin stepped forward and received the first attack on his shield, the true battle started. In early April, Antarctica was enveloped by eternal twilight. The sun seemed to have frozen in place as it plunged behind the horizon, painting a persistent line of vibrant scarlet in the cold purple sky. Stuck between night and day, the southern quadrant was slowly slipping into the embrace of pure darkness that would last for many months. The behavior of the moon was strange and erratic as well. It remained in the sky for several weeks, then disappeared without a trace for long stretches of time. The radiant tapestry of Aurora Australis sometimes appeared to keep it company. Sunny had heard that the southern lights were breathtakingly beautiful, but he was yet to witness them himself. In any case, he did not care about heavenly miracles right now. All he cared about was whether his soldiers would be able to see the enemy clearly, even though the long night had not descended yet. It was already hard enough to discern important details in the dim twilight. For that reason, Kim was currently channeling his vision to the rest of the cohort. The difference it made could be easily seen, unencumbered by the absence of bright light, and without the need to rely on luminescent memories. The melee vanguard moved as confidently as they would have in the middle of the day. Quentin stepped forward and leaned into his shield, meeting the charging abomination without giving any ground. His sword flashed forward, dealing a deep wound to the beast. Already, the edges of the cut started to rot, and the damage was even worse inside since the blade bit deep. The combat healer flung the convulsing body of the nightmare creature aside and slashed at another one without any hint of hesitation. To his right, Dorn brought his heavy sledgehammer down, turning the head of a snarling abomination into bloody pulp. To his right, Belle's sword shimmered through the air, decapitating another. The road was narrow enough to prevent the swarm from surrounding them, and the slope of the mountain had turned into a killing field because of the bloodthirsty shadow spikes. The enemy could not flank the vanguard, so all the abominations could do was charge forward and up, half a dozen at a time. As the pressure of the mass of nightmare creatures mounted, the three fighters turned into an impregnable bastion. Quentin drew most attention and withstood an attack after attack, which granted Belle and Dorn a modicum of freedom. They used it well, visiting unabashed slaughter upon the tide of eyeless beasts. The swordsman danced between them, phasing through his enemies and slicing their bodies apart as if they were made from paper. Dorn fought in a more reserved fashion, but his devastating and inescapable attacks were even more fearsome. Luster thrust his halberd forward from time to time, finishing off wounded enemies or preventing them from breaking through the walls of steel created by Quentin, Belle, and Dorn. Streams of foul blood were soon running down the surface of the mountain road. However, not everything went well for the cohort. Despite the unshakable will, ferocity, and deadly skill of the melee vanguard, there were just too many nightmare creatures for them to fight. Each of the abominations was powerful and deadly as well, already. A few heavy hits landed on Quentin's armor, sending a net of thin cracks running through the polished breastplate. The healer easily managed to restore its integrity, but how long would he be able to keep up this lethal dance? Belle and Dorn were better off than him, but not by much. For now, one managed to avoid being torn apart due to his elusive aspect, while the other used his strength and calculating mind to avoid danger. Worse still, there were also the fallen abominations to think about. Just then, the first of the lumbering monstrosities finally reached the crest of the hill, ruthlessly throwing several of the lesser creatures into the canyon to clear a path for itself. The fallen lunged forward, opening its maw to bite down on Quentin's shield, and maybe take the healer's entire arm off with it. Before it could, however, a black arrow silently slid into its throat. The abomination twitched and fell down, sliding forward on the asphalt as a river of blood poured out of its mouth. Sunny was already drawing his bow again. Higher up the slope, Samara was calmly sending slug after slug into the attacking swarm. Kim was standing still, concentrating on providing all 6 members of the cohort with a clear view of the battlefield, as well as letting them know where to strike to deal as much damage as possible.
Hell, we might actually make it.
Sunny had several trump cards saved up in case things went south, but he was reluctant to use them unless necessary. This clash was an important step for the cohort. Up until now, they had only trained together. Being christened by blood in an actual battle would not only show how capable his soldiers were, but also truly bring them together, sadly. Just as he thought that, the situation suddenly and dreadfully changed. As the whole swarm of the eyeless abominations got close to the crest of the hill, the creatures froze for a split second. And then, the long jagged spikes growing from their spines suddenly grew hazy, producing a strange vibration that covered the surrounded area like a dome. Sunny heard a high-pitched ringing that burrowed into his ears like a hot needle, and then the entire world suddenly spun.
Curses.
He swayed, almost falling off the rhino's roof. Suddenly, Sunny couldn't tell where was up and where was down, where was left and where was right. Everything around him turned blurry, disorienting, and impossible to tell apart. Through the shadows, he felt Quentin missing a step and being thrown back by a charging abomination. Dorn swung his sledgehammer to cover the falling healer, but missed and was pulled off balance by the inertia of his mighty strike. Belle phased back and staggered, almost tumbling to the ground. Sonic attack. Sunny gritted his teeth and dove through the shadows, disappearing from sight and emerging between the fighters of the melee vanguard a moment later. A flute carved out of emerald bone appeared in his hands, kicking a nearby beast hard enough to crush its ribs and send the revolting creature flying away. Sunny brought the flute to his lips and blew into it softly. A moment later, a cone of absolute silence enveloped the crest of the hill. Instantly, the world stopped spinning, and he could see clearly again. As Quentin, Dorn, and Belle picked themselves up and readied their weapons with a visible relief, Sunny smiled darkly and stared at the approaching monsters. The cruel sight was already weaving itself into existence, surrounded by swirling fog. Taking a step forward, Sunny gripped the shaft of the somber spear and grinned.
Denied.
The swarm had lost its leader. The momentum of its charge had been crushed. The secret weapon of the eyeless abominations had been rendered useless, and most importantly of all, scores of them had already lost their lives. But the nightmare creatures still presented a mortal danger to the cohort. There were still enough of them to bury Sunny and his soldiers under a mountain of flesh, claws, and fangs. More than a dozen fallen abominations remained, as well, rushing forward to devour the 7 humans. An ugly smile appeared on Sunny's face.
Well, come get us then.
As the blade of the cruel sight shone with incandescent light, he sliced through the body of a lunging beast and issued a quick command.
Vanguard, follow me.
He put the shaft of the somber spear in the way of a snarling maw, shifted his weight to throw the enemy to the ground, and struck another abomination with the butt of his weapon.
Kim, move forward to the crest of the hill. Samara, get closer and keep pressuring the fallen.
As he spun and unleashed a diagonal cut, beheading a disoriented monster, a new memory was already weaving itself into existence. A thin iron chain was soon wrapped around his neck. On it hung a small statuette in the form of a beautiful young woman that held a spear in one hand and a human heart in another. Blood was pouring from a gaping wound on her bared chest. The dying wish seemed to come alive as his essence flowed into it.
Death Wish Enchantment Description. Those who witness the wielder of this memory are compelled, friends to be inspired, foes to seek the wielder out. The power of the memory grows the more enemies they give the gift of death and can be consumed to heal the wielder's wounds. Death Charge 0-1000.
Now that Sunny was at the front of the cohort's battle formation, both his soldiers and the nightmare creatures could see him clearly. Well, he wasn't sure if the eyeless abominations could see anything, but they definitely perceived him in some mysterious way. The effect of the transcendent charm could be felt instantly. Behind him, the 4 fighters of the melee vanguard were suddenly reinvigorated. Their movements grew faster, sharper, and more focused. The enemies, on the other hand, became even more frenzied. They lunged at Sunny like rabid beasts, consumed by blind hatred, hunger, and madness. With all this fury mostly concentrated on him and him alone, Quentin, Belle, Dorn, and Luster gained some space to breathe, which was a good thing, but...
Crap.
This was the first time Sunny used this particular memory, and he was already starting to regret it a little. The pressure of the mad onslaught that the affected nightmare creatures unleashed upon him was no joke. Gritting his teeth, he spun and danced, slaughtering one abomination after another. Guided by him, the vanguard slowly pushed into the swarm, taking a few tentative steps forward. Sunny served as the tip of their formation, turning into a bloody hurricane of radiant silver and bleak steel. Despite his superior strength and speed, another fighter would have been quickly overpowered by the sheer mass and ferocity of the countless nightmare creatures, then brought down to the ground and either crushed or torn apart. Luckily, Sunny was just too slippery and elusive to be surrounded and piled upon. As 3 shadows wrapped themselves around his body, his agility and swiftness reached superhuman heights. More importantly, when even that wasn't enough, he easily stepped through the shadows to avoid being swarmed by the onslaught of frenzied beasts. Empowered by his incredibly high divine affinity, the undying chain effortlessly withstood stray blows that managed to get past his defenses from time to time. The cruel sight sang, harvesting life after life like the scythe of the Grim Reaper. Behind him, the melee vanguard fought with murderous resolve and swiftly improving cohesion. Not only were they able to provide Sunny with much-needed support and block the enemies from attacking him from the back, each also killed one abomination after another. Belle's sword sliced through bodies as if not meeting any resistance. Dorn's sledgehammer crushed them like a devastating wrecking ball. Quentin's attacks were not as spectacular, but each abomination wounded by him soon stumbled, convulsed, or simply fell down and died. Even Luster was doing his part. either thrusting his halberd forward like a spear or using its hook to throw the eyeless beasts off balance and make it easier for others to slay them. Samara had abandoned her sniper nest and moved closer to the crest of the hill to dive into the dome of silence created by Sunny. Her new position was not as advantageous, but she still managed to lend most of her shots, although not all of them were able to hit the weak spot on the forehead of the fallen abominations, even those that had not dealt the powerful creatures serious wounds. A few eyeless beasts had managed to slip through the defensive line of the melee vanguard back when the swarm first unleashed its sonic attack. They were already hurtling in her direction with nothing slowing them down. As they did, a hail of bullets suddenly struck the abominations from the side, tearing into their bodies. Kim, who was running up the road, aimed her carbine without ever slowing down and unleashed a rain of charged rounds on the nightmare creatures barreling down on Samara. Reaching the last one, she let go of the weapon and allowed it to hang freely from its sling. The young woman sidestepped the lunge of the rabid monstrosity, then delivered a powerful uppercut with her buckler. As its edge connected with the beast's jaw and jerked the eyeless head up, a slender rapier shot forward, piercing the abomination's neck. A moment later, the beast was dead. Not too long after that, Kim reached the crest, fell on one knee, and took up her carbine once again. Now that the melee vanguard advanced slightly down the road, she had a clear line of fire at the swarm. Firing it in short bursts, the young woman joined the mayhem. Suffocating under the constant flood of frenzied monsters, Sunny grinned.
Dorn, don't try to kill every abomination, just push them off the cliff when you can. The fall is unlikely to kill them, but we can easily clean up the stragglers later. Luster, disengage and help Samara regain some essence. The rest, continue doing what you're doing, slaughter them all.
The members of the cohort obliged, echoing his last command with battle cries of their own. Slaughter them. Slaughter them all. Slaughter. And so they did. In the end, the cohort eradicated the swarm of the eyeless nightmare creatures. It was not easy, and there were moments when each of them brushed with death. But eventually, the 7 humans observed the vast killing field with tired expressions, exhausted but alive. Hundreds of cut, crushed, and torn bodies littered the broken asphalt of the mountain road. Blood flowed down the hill, pooling into crimson puddles at its base. The carcasses of the fallen abominations towered above the corpses of their lesser ilk like mounds of rotten meat. Looking at the ghastly sight, Sunny felt very happy that the army supplied them with actual food. Right now, he was very reluctant to go back to the familiar diet of only eating monster meat. With a sigh, he turned away and glanced at his ragged band of soldiers. Despite the fact that their battle was over, time was still of the essence.
Luster, go inform the army command that the road is secured, then bring the rhino to the crest and park it on the slope. The rest of you rest while you can. Oh, and also good work.
The members of the cohort looked at each other, lively smiles appearing on their tired faces. We did do all right, didn't we? With that, they walked away from the mass of mangled bodies and sprawled on the ground, steam rising from their blood-covered armors into the cold air. Soon, the rhino arrived, its headlights painting a much more morbid picture of the recent battleground. The soldiers rested and recovered their essence. Since no one was seriously injured, Quentin was in no hurry to tend to the wounded. No one stood guard as well, since Sunny's shadows could fulfill that role better than any human. Everything seemed to be peaceful and safe. However, he was not fooled. Down in the valley, the ugly rift in the fabric of reality was still pulsing with eerie darkness, silently calling to Sunny. The gate was still open. Although they had defeated the initial wave of nightmare creatures that had emerged from it, more could arrive at any moment. The first wave was usually the most dangerous, but not always. It ordinarily consisted of the abominations that had been close to the seed of nightmare when it bloomed, but as long as the gate remained open, more monsters could wander through it into the real world. In fact, Sunny suspected that nightmare creatures experienced a call that was very similar to the one that Awakened felt. It drew them from the reaches of the dream realm toward the blooming seed. Those that had been near it arrived first, but many more could eventually come. That was why if a gate could not be closed, It had to be contained and constantly monitored by the government forces, at least near or within the population centers. With time, the number of such containment zones grew, stretching the ability of the government to secure them. So, the cohort was not entirely safe. He stared at the eerie rift for some time, feeling the call slowly eating away at his sanity. Then Sunny shook his head, walked over to the rhino and sat down in its shadow. He was tired as well. It was time to sort out the results of the battle. Summoning the runes, he thoughtfully studied them.
Name sunless, true name lost from light, rank ascended, class devil, shadow cores 4-7, shadow fragments 1246 4000.
On curses.
Despite the scope and ferocity of the recent battle, he had only received 30 or so shadow fragments from it, 4 for killing the gate guardian, the rest for slaying the fallen abominations. Since Sunny was ascended now, he gained nothing from slaying nightmare creatures of the dormant and awakened ranks. Becoming a tyrant was not going to be easy.
Whatever.
He continued to read the runes with a sour expression. Memories: Silver Bell, Puppeteer's Shroud, Midnight Shard, Extraordinary Rock, Prowling Thorn, Endless Spring, Dark Wing, Moonlight Shard, Mantle of the Underworld, Weaver's Mask, Broken Oath, Autumn Leaf, Cruel Sight, Covetous Coffer, Undying Chain, Heavenly Burden, Memory of Fire, Memory of Ice, Strike of Thunder, Morgan's Warbow, Shadow Lantern, Bone Singer, Shadow Chair, Overpriced Saddle, Dying Wish, Evil Eye. Sunny had learned to weave names into the memories he created after coming back from the nightmare. Shadow Chair was the exquisite wooden chair he had borrowed from Noctis. Sadly, no other item Sunny had tried to bring back to the real world survived. Everything had simply ceased to exist once he returned, to his bitter disappointment. However, the artificial memory remained. The overpriced saddle was the stupidly expensive saddle he had commissioned for Nightmare. The evil eye was the new memory he had just received for killing the devil named Defiled Witness. There were also a few awakened memories he had gained, but they seemed only good enough to be fed to his shadows.
I'll deal with them later.
He turned his attention back to the runes. Echoes. Shadows, Marble Saint, Nightmare, Soul Serpent. Attributes: Faded, Flame of Divinity, Master of Shadows, Blood Weave, Bone Weave. Aspect: Shadow Slave. Aspect: Rank: Divine. Aspect: Abilities: Shadow Control, Shadow Step, Shadow Manifestation. Aspect: Legacy: Shadow Dance. Flaw: Clear Conscience. Dream Anchor, Tower of Hope. The name of the Soul Serpent was dim and lifeless. Sunny could not dismiss or summon the shadow back after gifting it to Rain, at least not from a distance. He still felt a subtle connection to it, though. He knew that serpent was alive and well.
That's something, at least. They are both all right.
With a sight, Sunny concentrated on his new memory, the evil eye. After reading the description, he learned that it was capable of enhancing one's vision, making a person capable of discerning more details and seeing things clearly from a greater distance. The effect had to be rather powerful since it came from a fallen devil, but he had to decide what to do with it. Sunny could either use it himself, feed it to one of his shadows, or give it to one of his soldiers. Samara and Kim were the best candidates. The awakened sharpshooter would be able to pick off targets from much further away, which was an obvious benefit. The timid seer, however. Sunny was very curious to find out how the augmentation of the evil eye would affect her ability to see the vulnerabilities of his enemies. After thinking about it for a bit, he turned his head and said,
Hey, Kimmy, come here for a second.
The evil eye seemed to suit Kim's aspect very well. Of course, the cohort was only going to really learn how much it had been improved during their next battle, which without a doubt would follow very soon. But not yet. Sitting on the ground and watching snowflakes dance in the dim sky, Sunny rested and evaluated the performance of his soldiers, and his own, in the clash against the swarm of eyeless beasts. Overall, he was satisfied with the result. Why wouldn't he be? Considering that the enemy had been destroyed, while none of his subordinates had suffered a serious injury. Everyone had performed well. Belle, Dorn, and Quentin had shown their value as elite combat specialists. Samara had confidently surpassed his already high expectations. Kim had been instrumental to their overall effectiveness and provided adequate support. While Luster's contribution had not seemed that spectacular, his presence actually made all the difference. The young man had also done well enough for himself as a second-line fighter. However, things weren't that simple. A subtle frown appeared on Sunny's face.
How troublesome.
The relative ease of their victory had been predicated on several factors. Firstly, and most importantly, control over the terrain and the proper use of its advantages. Secondly, the immediate elimination of the fallen commander of the swarm. Without the defiled witness, none of the nightmare creatures had possessed fearsome, unnatural powers. The vile abilities that devils and abominations of higher classes possessed added an element of unpredictability to every battle. It was that instability that made any kind of strategy and planning unreliable. This time, Sunny had been able to remove the threat and maintain tactical superiority, but what about the next? He doubted that every future battle would be as orderly. Lastly, the cohort had not held back and unleashed its full power to destroy the swarm. Sunny had avoided using his trump cards, but his reserves of essence were now depleted by more than a half. His soldiers were in an even worse situation. It was going to take a couple of days for them to recover, maybe less if Luster was involved. Sunny did not regret going all out, since it allowed him to create a benchmark of what the cohort was capable of. However, he had a nagging suspicion that they would not be allowed the luxury of carelessly burning through their essence in the future. Who knew when the next combat engagement would come? There was no guarantee that the cohort would receive the time they needed to recharge.
Conserving essence is going to be a priority. I feel it in my bones.
His expression darkened. The more his soldiers were constrained in how to express their powers, the more risks they would have to endure. Turning his head slightly, Sunny threw a calculating glance at Luster. The young man suddenly shivered and looked back, asking nervously why the captain was staring at him. Sunny gave him a reassuring smile, which only made Luster appear more nervous for some reason.
Oh, just thinking about the future, but since we are talking, take Kim and go collect us some soul shards. Don't bother with the fallen abominations, though. Their hides are too tough, so it would be a waste of time to dress them.
The army would take care of this. As the officer in charge of the cohort, Sunny was privy to the information about how saturated the soul cores of his subordinates were, not to mention that he could make a rough estimate himself simply by taking a look. Actually, they did not need too many shards. Dorn and Samara had long reached full saturation, while Belle and Quentin were extremely close to it. Only Luster and Kim lagged behind a bit due to their age. The cohort was going to reach its full potential sooner rather than later. As Luster and Kim left, chaperoned by one of his shadows just in case, Sunny leaned on the hull of the Rhino and closed his eyes. After spending years in the deadly and unpredictable expanse of the dream realm, he knew not to miss the rare and precious opportunities to rest. For a while, the small mountain valley was calm and silent, not too far away, behind the rugged slopes. The bleakness of the twilight sky was being torn apart by orange flashes of heavy artillery fire. The echoes of thunderous explosions reached the valley from time to time, but the mayhem itself remained somewhere in the distance, where the main body of the army division was engaged in a bloody battle against the small horde of nightmare creatures. Soon, however, a low rumbling drew closer, and subtle vibrations spread through the surface of the broken road. Opening one eye, Sunny looked down, where a long column of army vehicles was climbing up the slope. At its front, a squad of war platforms marched, their wide metal feet sending cracks through the asphalt with each step. A few of the smaller ones were holding rifles not unlike the coilgun wielded by Samara. Of course, in their giant hands, the massive rifles looked small and lightweight, like modest sidearms at most. The battalion whose path the cohort had been ordered to secure finally arrived. They were going to follow the road and flank the horde of abominations, finishing the pincer maneuver. This probably meant that Sunny and his soldiers were done with their short respite. Soon, the towering war platforms reached the crest of the hill where Rhino was parked, lingered there for a moment, and continued down into the valley. The army vehicles and members of the mechanized infantry arrived next, accompanied by a good number of awakened. One of them stopped near the spot where the cohort was resting and glanced at the carnage below. His face paled. The man remained silent for a while, then glanced at Belle, who was relaxing on a boulder nearby, and asked in disbelief if they had killed all these abominations by themselves. The swordsman simply smiled and confirmed that they sure had. The awakened stared at him incredulously, stammering that there were hundreds of them. Belle blinked a couple of times, then shrugged and replied that they were irregulars. The soldier opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. Belle, meanwhile, thought for a bit and added that the man shouldn't be too impressed, since their captain had probably killed half of them, and they had just stayed back and tried to make themselves useful. The awakened soldier was clearly impressed. He looked at the swordsman with begrudging respect, remained silent for a few moments, and asked who their captain was. Belle suddenly laughed and declared that their captain was the devil himself. At that moment, Samara appeared from the hatch of the Rhino and called out to Sunny. "Captain, we are being hailed on the comms." He sighed, then opened his eyes and reluctantly stood up. As the awakened soldier stared at the pale young man with wide eyes, he smiled pleasantly, and then disappeared without a trace, prompting the man to flinch and take a step back. Back inside the APC, Sunny emerged from the shadows, walked over to the communications suite, and sat down behind a terminal. At the press of a button, Master Jet's face appeared on the screen. Soul Reaper seemed to be standing in front of a pile of mangled corpses, illuminated by an angry orange glow. Dancing flames reflected in her icy blue eyes, making it seem as if they were glowing. Set against that backdrop, her smile looked rather sinister.
"Hey, Sunny, I heard that your cohort won its first battle. I guess congratulations are in order."
He nodded and studied the carcasses of nightmare creatures behind her.
Yeah, you seem to have achieved a victory as well. What's the situation like with the other divisions?
The field army had separated into 7 divisions after reaching the Antarctic Center, or was it brigades? Sunny was still a bit confused about the hierarchy of army units. In any case, one of them had stayed behind in Falcon Scott, while the other 6 had deployed south and were currently on the move. Each consisted of 10 to 15,000 soldiers and was accompanied by 700 awakened or so.
"It's not too bad, yet the irregulars are doing their job as well. For now, everything seems to be going according to plan. What about you? How did your cohort perform?"
Bad. We mopped up the opposition easily enough. However, we wasted a lot of essence. If the intensity of the conflict picks up, I'm not sure if I can employ the same strategy again.
She nodded.
"It will definitely pick up, so good thinking."
At that moment, something thundered from the dynamics, and the image on the screen became noisy for a few moments. Soul Reaper lowered her communicator and looked somewhere to the side with a resentful expression. She pursed her lips, then said in a neutral tone,
"Anyway, I have to go. Follow the flanking battalion for now and help them deal with the horde that's blocking your division from advancing south. Don't exert yourself and your soldiers, though. Take it easy and conserve your essence."
I will do.
Master Jet glanced at him briefly and nodded.
"Good luck, Sunny."
He sighed.
Good luck to you, too.
However, the signal had already cut, turning the screen black. All that remained was his pale reflection. Sunny lingered for a few moments, then shook his head and headed toward the exit hatch of the Rhino. Nothing much had changed outside. The sky was still cold, dim, and illuminated by the distant cannonade of human artillery. In the valley below, the army engineers were setting up autonomous observation posts around the active gate and laying explosive charges around it. While humanity could not close every gate, it had learned to diminish their threat in various ways over the years. Encasing them in cement or burying the rift under tons of soil were just a couple of methods to slow down the emerging nightmare creatures at least a little. Another group of support personnel was already cleaning up the road and harvesting the soul shards. Sunny could have made a point about securing his share of the spoils, but it was too much hassle. The results would be tallied and converted to an appropriate amount of contribution points anyway. Plus, Luster and Kim were already back with their trophies. Stepping out of the APC, Sunny looked at his soldiers.
Gather up.
As the cohort assembled around him, he pointed to the glimmering crystals.
Those with unsaturated cores, share the soul shard among yourself and absorb them. We have 10 minutes to get ready to move out. Our next task is to support the assault on the flank of the bunch of abominations making a ruckus on the other side of the mountain. Only dormant abilities and passive enchantments this time, so don't get too rowdy. Once the threat is eliminated, we can get some sleep, understood?
There were no questions. 10 minutes later, the rhino joined the column of the army vehicles and rolled forward, in the direction where the flashes of light and the sounds of explosions were coming from. The flanking battalion passed the small valley, climbed high up the slope of the mountain, then crested a narrow pass and came in view of a massive battle below. Around 2,000 nightmare creatures were pressing down on the defensive line of a well-organized human force. The soldiers were not in a hurry to attack and concentrated on keeping the abominations away from themselves. The barrage of explosive shells, squall of slugs unleashed by the towering war platforms, and countless soldiers of the mechanized infantry, and several hundred, awakened, were doing a good job of containing the raging horde. Looking at the chaotic battlefield from above, Sunny grimaced. At this distance, the 6 nightmare gates that had disgorged the horde were already whispering into his ears.
This is going to get old really fast, isn't it?
The army command soon sent them a packet of information, marking down priority targets in the mass of abominations and transferring other important data. As the battalion formed to start the assault on the flank of the enemy force, Sunny studied it all and then pointed at an especially ugly monstrosity.
That will be our target. We must take this gate guardian down. You guys help me clear the path to the big bastard, then stay back.
Sure, Master Jet had told him to take it easy, but Sunny was not going to miss a chance to earn a few shadow fragments. His eyes gleamed with bloodlust, making the members of the cohort shift uncomfortably. Soon, the preparations were done and the flanking force attacked. At the same time, the main body of the division changed its routine, initiating a charge of their own. Pressed between the two, the horde of nightmare creatures stood no chance. Of course, the battalion attacking from the slope of the mountain, and the irregulars accompanying it, got it much worse than the rest of the human force. Nevertheless, the resistance of the abominations was quickly crushed, and they were ruthlessly eradicated. Sunny managed to take down another gate guardian as well. As the exhausted soldiers celebrated the decisive victory, he scowled deeply and then looked south. The whispers assaulting his mind were growing stronger and stronger. A moment later, the ground shook and the fabric of reality seemed to split open in the distance. Sunny closed his eyes for a moment.
A 1, 2, 3.
As he watched with a weary expression, several new nightmare gates suddenly tore a path into the waking world. Then even more. The shocked soldiers rushed to get back into formations, while countless abominations were appearing from the rifts, flooding the air with their frenzied howls and shrieks. Worse still, one of the gates opened directly behind the army, putting it into an encirclement. Standing on top of the corpse of the massive guardian, Sunny sighed and shook his head dejectedly.
This is going to be a long day.
Well, of course it would be. Since they were in Antarctica, this day was going to last for another few weeks, and then turn into a night that would last for many months. He had a feeling that this endless night would feel even longer. 7 new gates, a flood of nightmare creatures, thousands of tired soldiers who had hoped for a well-deserved reprieve after the long and furious battle, only to have that hope snuffed out in an instant. Sunny could feel the resolve of humans surrounding him faltering. But in the end, they quickly collected themselves. The officers barked orders. The soldiers hurriedly gathered in proper formations. The lumbering mobile war platforms repositioned to open fire on the new threat. Truth be told, the new development was well within the division's ability to handle. Luckily, none of the gates showed signs of reaching Category 3, so they did not pose more threat than the previous 6. The human force had barely suffered any casualties, if any at all, in the recent battle, and they had a theoretical chance of repeating that success. If there was one problem, though, it was that the division, just like Sunny and his soldiers, had overexerted itself in the previous engagement. Logistical vehicles hastily moved forward to give the fighters an opportunity to reload their empty magazines and recharge their armor suits. Artillery needed new batches of explosive shells. Infantry needed energy cells and ammunition. MWP companies needed to cool down to avoid a forced shutdown. All that demanded time, which caused humans to blunder the immensely important opening act of the second offensive. Additionally, they had lost the precious terrain advantage and strategic control due to the fact that one of the gates opened behind them. That just meant that the warriors of the awakened detachment had to pick up the slack and buy their mundane comrades a chance to regroup and properly enter the battle. That included Sunny and his soldiers too. Sunny muttered a bitter curse. Sunny remained motionless for a few moments, studying the approaching flood of nightmare creatures as his mind went into an overdrive. He had no doubt that hundreds of awakened accompanying the division would be able to stall and destroy the threat. Eventually, however, this time, the human force was not going to achieve victory with minimal losses. Many people were going to die. Was it time to unleash his trump cards already? Sunny exclaimed that this was just day one, for heaven's sake. He had come to Antarctica in search of greater strength. Saving the lives of his fellow soldiers sounded very much like something that a man of conviction would do. However, Sunny was not convinced. Why should he go above and beyond to help these people to even the odds? It was not like they were going to suffer a crushing defeat. Victory was all but guaranteed, with only its cost remaining in doubt. Showing his aces, on the other hand, was a bit risky. Sunny would have felt more comfortable if he and his cohort were acting alone, but here in the middle of a massive battlefield. The thought left a bad taste in his mouth. He was tempted to bide his time. There was a grim feeling slowly rising in his heart, though. Indeed, it was the very start of a campaign that promised to be long and arduous. If Sunny did not go all out and his division lost a bunch more soldiers as a result, the losses would not be anywhere near substantial. In the grand scheme of things, however, what would happen if a bunch of soldiers died tomorrow too, and then the day after that and the day after that? Pretty soon, there would be no one left to fight by his side. And that was a big problem. Suddenly, a simple and chilling realization struck his mind. Sunny's eyes widened slightly. The thing he had come to understand was so straightforward that it bordered on obvious. Antarctica was not a place where one could hold back. Even though the chain of nightmares was far away from reaching its full magnitude, everyone had to exert themselves to the absolute limit already, or face eventual and inevitable destruction. In fact, even that might not be enough. Sunny gritted his teeth. He had known that this cataclysm was going to be a dreadful trial, of course, but now it became starkly clear that even Sunny had underestimated the true scope of the disaster. Theoretical understanding was very different from actual knowledge. Standing on top of the corpse of a mighty gate guardian, he sighed, and then glanced at his soldiers.
That gate over there seems to be bringing our old eyeless friends to the real world. Since we already know how to handle them, it will be our next target.
As one of the very few masters in the division and a captain of the first irregular company to boot, Sunny had a larger responsibility than most. It was a given that his cohort would have to lead the charge on one of the 7 gates. However, he couldn't be in several places at the same time. The gate that had opened behind the human formation, the one that posed the most threat and prevented the division from presenting a united front, thus constraining every soldier on the battlefield, was too far away from his position, and so the irregulars had no hope of reaching it in time. Someone else would have to handle it.
Samara changed position to get a clear line of fire on the designated gate. Kimmy, stay close to Luster and assist him in covering the vanguard's back. Stay alive, kill them all.
Without wasting any more time, the cohort rushed forward to meet the onslaught of frenzied abominations. Hundreds of awakened joined them, creating a buffer between the nightmare creatures and the line of mundane soldiers, buying time for the division to form an effective response. A dozen seconds after they left, however, something moved in the shadow of the massive carcass. Suddenly, a terrifying black steed emerged from it, carrying a fearsome dark rider. The rider observed the battlefield with cold indifference, and then sent her destrier into a gallop. Their eyes burned with infernal red flames. Nightmare and Saint were heading away from the approaching abominations, toward the hastily assembled battle formation of human soldiers. A soldier named Ash was not having a great day. Early into the battle, his powerful exoskeleton armor suit sustained damage to one of its knee joints. Although he could still fight and shoot his rifle, not to mention more than willing to face the abominations despite having his mobility severely reduced, the command judged that the risk was not worth it. As a result, he had to abandon his fellow infantrymen and retreat to the supply train of the division, where a team of techs tried to repair his suit as fast as possible. Sadly, they weren't fast enough. Who knew that a bunch of new gates would open, with one of them appearing almost on top of the scarcely defended supply train? While the techs and other non-combatants desperately tried to retreat closer to the main formation, Ash and a small number of soldiers that happened to be nearby had no choice but to face the advancing nightmare creatures alone. They unleashed a torrent of bullets at the monsters, but there were just too many of them. Even when he emptied his shoulder-mounted launcher to send a hail of miniature rockets into the mass of rabid abominations, the surprisingly potent explosive load his missiles carried failed to make any difference. He had managed to slaughter a number of dormant bastards with that salvo, but those of them that were awakened. You needed an awakened to kill another awakened. All mundane soldiers knew that, more or less. Slowly, Ash's blood turned cold in his veins. He kept muttering that things were bad, very bad. Attach bayonets. That was the order that every soldier dreaded. Ash resolutely pressed a button on the side of his rifle. A moment later, a powerful alloy blade slid from underneath its barrel, turning the weapon into an improvised spear. He snarled a challenge at the wretches, daring them to come. Despite his bravado, Ash felt more and more like he was not going to live to see the next day, or whatever it was that counted as a day in the damned southern quadrant. The odds just seemed too slim. The awakened abominations were bad enough, but he at least had a theoretical chance to take down one or two with the help of his powered armor. But there were also fallen ones, most terrifyingly of all a creature that resembled a giant, ancient, rotting carcass of a monstrous deer had just emerged from the gate, sending the other ghastly beasts into a frenzy. It had to be a devil at least, or maybe even a tyrant. Ash shuddered and readied himself. He declared that so be it. That they needed to give the supply guys time to run, and that these bastards were going to learn what humans were capable of. He added that maybe reinforcements would arrive in time. The mini-busters on the back of the heavy exoskeleton ignited, pushing him forward. Ash sliced through the flesh of the revolting creature, then tried to land a blow on another snarling abomination. Sadly, at that moment, the damaged joint of his armor finally gave out, throwing him off balance. The bayonet slid off the hide of the awakened monster without leaving even a scratch on it. Ash helplessly toppled to the ground. Before he could move, sharp fangs closed on his shoulder, easily crushing the tempered alloy of his armor and the complicated internals of the powered suit. A terrible pain tore through his side. He realized, stammering, that he was going to die. He looked up and stared at the ugly snout of the monster that was going to kill him, his eyes wide. And then, the monster's head exploded into bloody chunks. Ash blinked as a visage out of a nightmare flashed past him. It was a black horse carrying a human rider that wore an intricate onyx armor. At least the rider looked like a human, or a demon perhaps. It was the black steed's hoof that had crushed the nightmare creature's head. Without ever slowing down, the demonic knight continued forward, killing numerous abominations in passing. Suddenly, the pressure on the mundane soldiers reduced. The dark rider and hers, nightmarish steed flew through the mass of rabid creatures, slaughtering one after another. Ash breathed a single word about the sword. The knight wielded a strange weapon. The sword she held was made out of black stone and broken. Its edge, however, was still sharp. As Ash struggled to stand up, the demonic knight tore through the onslaught of nightmare creatures, getting closer and closer to the monstrous deer. At some point, the rider gracefully jumped off the black steed's back, soaring high into the air and landing right in front of the charging guardian. Ash didn't see what happened next, because the figure of the infernal knight became hidden behind the mass of nightmare creatures. All he perceived was a chilling, absolutely inhuman shriek that suddenly rolled across the battlefield so loud that the auditory systems of his exosuit failed to filter the deafening wail out. He whispered an oath to the gods. Finally, he managed to raise himself from the ground. The battle was still not over. In fact, it was only starting. Even though Ash would have to struggle to do anything with only one functioning leg and a torn shoulder that reduced the range of motion of his right arm, he was determined to do his part. Rising his rifle once again, he glanced forward and saw the dreadful black horse rampaging among the nightmare creatures. There was no sign of its demonic rider, but judging by the erratic movements of the giant deer-like monstrosity, the Onyx Knight was fighting it. Ash demanded to know who was crazy enough to attack that horror alone, but the mysterious warrior did not just attack the terrifying Gate Guardian. Ash froze for a moment. He stammered, asking whether that demon had actually done what he thought she did. The rotting body of the ghastly deer suddenly swayed, and then toppled. Another shriek pierced Ash's ears, and then the mass of nightmare creatures seemed to lose most of its coordination. The Gate Guardian was dead. Ash couldn't believe his luck. And as though fortune truly smiled on him today, not too long after the fearsome abomination fell, reinforcements arrived from behind, forging an impregnable defense line to stop the enemy's advance. Ash fired the last of his bullets, then stumbled away and retreated. This time, he was sent to the field hospital instead of a repair vehicle, to have his body tended to instead of his powered suit. There, wincing as his torn shoulder was hastily mended together, Ash frowned. He muttered about the armor, the demonic aura, the cold indifference, and dark charisma. His eyes suddenly widened. The battle still raged on. But Ash was utterly preoccupied by something else. He blurted out that he had been saved by Mongrel. This time, Sunny chose to dove into the melee from the very first moment of the battle. His bow was a fearsome tool to slay powerful targets from a distance, but now that the situation had come to a full-fledged frontal assault, restraining the horde of lesser nightmare creatures was more important. After all, they were only less than when compared to utterly terrifying abominations. Each was still a deadly threat. Plus, using the Death Dealer enchantment again was out of question. Not to mention that the value of the Dying Wish was vastly increased, considering that he was leading a good 100 of Awakened, instead of a single cohort right now. Any ally who could see Sunny clash with the monsters would feel inspired to fight with renewed zeal and resolve. On the other hand, he was also facing an entire horde of nightmare creatures instead of a single swarm. That meant that the Dying Wish would make him the target of hundreds of frenzied abominations. Its power had also increased due to the fact that he had already killed dozens of enemies affected by the Death Wish enchantment in the previous 2 battles. Sunny let out a resigned sigh. He would just have to manage somehow. Sunny had already decided to go all out, but now, for the first time in a long time, he suddenly felt a dire lack of powerful tools at his disposal. He had always prided himself on how formidable and versatile his arsenal of memories was. But it seemed to have fallen behind the kinds of threats Sunny was facing these days. He didn't even have anything to arm Saint with. To his shame, her broken stone sword was deadlier than any melee weapon he possessed, except for the cruel sight. As a part of an ascended demon, the stone blade carried the power of an ascended weapon as well. Sadly, unlike Taciturn Shadow herself, the sword had not shown any sign of being able to repair itself. Yet, Sunny was clad in the undying chain, wielded the cruel sight, and harnessed the power of the Dying Wish. He was also augmented by 2 of his shadows. Saint only had the Broken Oath, which she could not use recklessly while riding Nightmare. The Black Courser and his rider were empowered by 1 shadow each. Other than that, there was not much Sunny could employ to change the odds in his favor. Sunny cursed under his breath, grumbling that he really needed more memories. What of the tools he did have, though? Sunny asked Kimmy what she could see. His soldiers were his tools too. Considering that the last powerful memory Sunny had found went a Kim, he hoped to get some results. There were just a dozen seconds left before they clashed with the enemy. The young woman lingered for a moment, and then said something that ignited a small flame in Sunny's heart. She reported that she could see the beasts were vulnerable to sonic attacks. Sunny seized on that immediately. Sunny had formed a similar suspicion after facing the eyeless abominations for the first time, but unsubstantiated suspicions were not something a good strategy could be built upon. Now, however, Sunny ventured that it had to be their perception. He summoned the flute carved out of a strange emerald femur, the Bone Singer. This ascended memory of the third tier, which he had gained in the Red Colosseum, possessed 3 enchantments: Sonorous, Silenced, and Sepulchre Song. The first one allowed the flute to sing at various volumes. This was the enchantment Sunny had copied to the silver bell and the ordinary rock. The second allowed the flute to create a dome of silence around itself. The third one, Sunny had not been able to use it yet. It was supposed to raise the dead. However, one had to know how to actually play the flute to activate it, which Sunny did not. Additionally, the risen corpses would be murderous, wicked, and uncontrolled. The only way to command them and prevent them from attacking the summoner was to soothe them with a correct melody, which he had no way of knowing as well. In any case, Sunny was only interested in the sonorous enchantment right now. Commanding the flute to sing as loud as it could, he saturated it with his essence and then threw the bone instrument to Luster. Sunny barked at him to play it. The young man caught the emerald flute and stared at it with a startled expression. Luster protested that he had no idea how to play it. Sunny was already turning back to the tide of abominations. He snapped at Luster to just blow into the hole. Luster hesitated for half a second, then obediently brought the Bone Singer to his lips. A moment later, a deafening, discordant, ear-piercing whistle exploded from the flute, spreading far and wide. And just a moment before the flood of eyeless abominations crashed against the awakened. They suddenly stumbled and lost their momentum as though severely disoriented. Sunny grinned as the cruel sight reaped the life of his first victim. The Bone Singer had not produced a sonic attack per se. It was just terribly loud and hideously shrill. However, just like he had thought, that turned out to be enough. The beasts were blind after all. They had to perceive the world through some other means, and their hearing had turned out to be the dominant one of those. If Sunny had to guess, he would have said that the long spikes on their backs were meant to sense sound waves spreading through the air, which the abominations were then able to interpret into a coherent picture of their surroundings. Subjecting them to the terrible song of the Bone Singer was akin to using a flashbang grenade. Without ever slowing down, Sunny cut into the horde of nightmare creatures. Driven into a murderous frenzy by the dying wish, hundreds of them rushed forward to tear him apart, only to die by his blade. Sunny had fully unleashed his powers. Dancing between the abominations like a dark deity, he slaughtered them without stop. Now that Sunny did not have to control the shape of the battlefield, he used shadow manifestation to enhance his own might. Dark tentacles rose from the ground to ensnare and rip his enemies apart. From time to time, 2 additional limbs appeared on his body, piercing the abominations or slicing their bodies with adamantine claws. The cruel sight shrieked like a banshee every time it cut the air. Over the years, Sunny had been subjected to all kinds of attacks and tortures. The dark mirror enchantment of the somber spear had long accumulated a vast library of elemental damage types. He had just never had a reason to use any except for divine flame and soul attacks. Things were different now. Soon, piles of corpses and rivers of blood surrounded him. The more abominations attacked him, the more he was able to kill. The sight of the slaughter was both terrifying and eerily beautiful. The awakened detachment of the human division faced the onslaught of the nightmare creatures, shuddered, but managed to hold the horde off for a few precious minutes. Then, the mundane soldiers of the First Evacuation Army joined the fray. Supported by the destructive might of their high-tech armaments, the awakened changed their tactic and went on the offensive. Sunny led one of the charges. With his cohorts serving as the tip of the spear, almost 100 warriors cut deep into the horde and moved to where the gate guardian was hiding. It was another fallen devil, similar to the one Sunny had killed a few hours before. This one, however, seemed slightly smaller and yet more powerful. It was a female. Sunny commanded his soldiers to stay back. As the distance to the dreadful abomination grew shorter, Sunny commanded his soldiers to keep away and dove through the shadows. Appearing near the gate guardian, once again, the creature's eyelids trembled as if about to open. Somehow he knew that he would be in terrible danger if he ever looked into those eyes. Trusting his intuition, Sunny closed his own and dashed forward while relying entirely on shadow sense. A small lantern hanging from his belt suddenly came to life, and a flood of darkness shrouded everything around. In the embrace of shadows, Sunny suddenly felt a mortifying chill assault his senses. The defiled witness was looking at him. A moment later, a bright flash tore the darkness apart. Imbued with divine flame, the blade of the cruel sight drew a line across the abomination's neck, beheading it. As the decapitated corpse fell to its knees, the bestial head flew away, enveloped in white flames. Not long after that, the battle was finally over.
What a day.
Sunny tiredly dragged his body back to the rhino, wincing in disgust at all the bodies littering the ground. Why did nightmare creatures have to be so ugly?
Why do you prefer to be surrounded by pretty corpses? That would probably be even worse.
War was ugly, and maybe, just maybe, it was actually a redeeming quality. His soldiers followed him just as exhausted. No one was seriously wounded, which was the best result Sunny could have hoped for. However, they were in no mood to speak. Other fighters of the First Army, however, felt differently. A buzz of voices surrounded them. The division was in the process of regrouping after the unexpectedly strenuous confrontation with not one, but two entire hordes of abominations. The logistics of the whole process were pure hell, which was only made worse by the strong interference produced by the gates. The gates, in the immediate area around the human force, separated merely by a few kilometers each. There were now 15 of them. 7 had opened at some point in the past, and 8 more opened simultaneously just a few hours ago. The idea of something like that happening would have seemed preposterous before. But with the chain of nightmares descending upon the southern quadrant, nothing was impossible anymore. Sunny shook his head. At least he collected plenty of fragments today, as well as earning himself some reputation. Anyone who had seen him fight had to be impressed. And why wouldn't they be? Sunny had personally slain 3 gate guardians today. There was one problem, though. As he walked through the battlefield, he couldn't help but overhear bits and pieces of various conversations. One soldier marveled that the irregulars were no joke, claiming he had seen their captain tear the head off a fallen devil's body with his bare hands. Sunny blinked. He muttered a bewildered question. The more he listened to what the soldiers were talking about, the more he heard the damned nickname. Mongrel, mongrel, mongrel. Sunny demanded to know if they were all insane. Sure. Saint's armor looked somewhat similar to the mantle of the underworld, but everything else was different. Firstly, and most importantly, she was clearly a woman while he was obviously a man. Secondly, his shadow wore her closed helmet instead of Weaver's mask. Who could mistake one for another? After thinking about it for a bit, however, Sunny came to a disturbing conclusion. He knew what Weaver's mask could do and why he wore it. People, however, did not. To them, the fearsome mask was just another memory, so it was perfectly natural that Mongrel would don a helmet instead of it before going into battle. Additionally, he doubted that anyone had gotten a good look at Saint. She was moving incredibly fast while galloping to the rear of the human formation, and then dove into a mass of nightmare creatures without ever slowing down. Whatever recording remained had to be of terrible quality, considering the disrupting effect of the gates. And speaking of recordings, as soon as they reached the rhino, Sunny connected his communicator to the vehicle's powerful communications suite and accessed the network. Almost immediately, the sensational titles of several recent articles attracted his attention. One proclaimed him a humble hero who had eschewed the allure of fame for almost 2 years before appearing in Antarctica to save 15,000 soldiers from certain doom. Sunny silently covered his face with a hand. He breathed that the gods knew that was fast. The government propaganda machine must have decided that Lord Mongrel, whoever he might be, was a good tool to prop up the current recruitment efforts. A somewhat hot celebrity appearing on the battlefield was a good tool to inspire more people to enlist. His face turned a little bitter. Sunny grumbled that he had killed 3 whole gate guardians, that Saint had only killed 1, and even then with the help of Nightmare, and demanded to know why no one was speaking about him. Even the soldiers of his division seemed to have completely forgotten about Sunny's contributions once the news of Mongrel appearing during the battle spread. Not that Sunny wanted to be recognized for anything. In fact, he vastly preferred being a complete unknown. But still. With a sigh, he looked up the recordings uploaded to the network. Just as he had expected, the quality was terrible. Saint looked like a blurry black silhouette with no definable features. What little the government allowed to be shown did not paint a clear picture of her clash against the nightmare creatures. It just looked like a mess of movement accompanied by a litany of bestial howls. However, that only added fuel to the collective imagination of people who had watched the video. He read a few of the discussions and closed his eyes for a moment, holding back a groan. Sunny demanded to know what this crap was. From what people were saying, it seemed as though mongrels single-handedly eradicated several thousands of nightmare creatures while actual soldiers helplessly stood back and applauded. Suddenly, Sunny let out a small laugh. Before unleashing Saint, he had been worried that people would connect the dots and realize that he was mongrel. Reality, however, turned out to be the exact opposite. Thousands of humans had witnessed him fight at the front of the formation, while at the same time, thousands more had seen someone who they mistakenly assumed to be mongrel fight at the back. The two couldn't possibly be the same. The action that could have potentially revealed his secret had become a perfect alibi instead. Sunny sighed and then shook his head in bewilderment. He conceded that that was something he guessed. There were a lot of things to do before the division resumed its march. Soul's shards had to be extracted from the carcasses of the nightmare creatures. The carcasses themselves had to be piled into mounds to clear the way for the vehicles. Usually, each would have been dressed to harvest useful materials. The hides and bones of the abominations were a precious resource, especially that of the fallen ones. However, no one had time to properly process the remains of the fearsome horde. So the corpses were simply discarded by the side of the road, doused in incendiary liquid and burned. The transports and artillery vehicles, damaged war platforms and powered suits of mechanized infantry had to be checked and repaired. Spent ammunition had to be replaced, wounded had to be healed. Soldiers, both mundane and awakened, needed time to rest and recover. Aboard the Rhino, members of the cohort slept in shifts. 3 entered the dream realm while the other 3 remained on guard. As soon as the first shift returned, the second shift took their place inside the sleeping pod. Sunny remained awake, meditating silently at the back of the vehicle. In the morning, the division had to perform one final task. In a solemn silence, the bodies of the fallen soldiers, about 100 or so, were covered by pristine white flags. The general in command of the division gave a short speech and then lowered his head. After that, several war platforms towering above him activated powerful flamethrowers attached to their mechanical arms, unleashing long streams of furious fire to consume the bodies. In the harsh conditions of the Antarctic campaign, the First Army could not give its fallen a better burial. Even if the division could spare time to dig graves in the frozen soil, the risk of a stray nightmare creature disturbing them in the future was too high. And with so many living people waiting for their turn to board the evacuation ships, sacrificing precious space to send the bodies back home was a luxury that no one could afford. Looking at the funeral pyre in silence, Sunny couldn't help but fall into a somber mood. Although the ritual itself was beautiful and dignified, in truth, the soldiers who had sacrificed their lives were treated not much different from the nightmare creatures that had killed them. In the end, both were consumed by flames. For some reason, the image of countless candles burning in front of the academy gates appeared in his mind. With a sigh, Sunny turned away and spoke to his subordinates, telling them to go. At least the losses weren't too terrible. If Saint had not struck down the guardian of the northernmost gate so swiftly, things could have been much worse. Soon, the division moved forward. All that was left behind was a landscape decimated by the battle, with snow and ash mixing as they swirled in the air. Sunny remained at the back of the Rhino with a contemplative expression on his face. Soon, however, he was distracted from his thoughts by an incoming communication. Master Jet's alabaster face appeared on the screen. Jet told Sunny she had a new mission for him. The field army dispatched to the Antarctic Center had a straightforward objective. Turn a small number of cities into impregnable strongholds. Relocate all human population of the region to these strongholds. and then entrench themselves for as long as it was going to take to evacuate everyone. At some point, reinforcements were supposed to arrive and make the task of withstanding the siege of nightmare creatures easier. Before that happened, however, the First Army had to complete the most perilous stage of the operation alone. Siege capitals had to be built, evacuation corridors had to be established, and millions of people had to be moved through them in a timely fashion. All of that demanded the human forces to be split into numerous smaller detachments, which posed a significant risk. Additionally, there were too many moving parts to this plan, and each of them could fail and end in disaster. Right now, the division Sunny was assigned to was swiftly moving toward a large city that was going to become an entrenched stronghold. In the process, they were also laying the groundwork to establish transportation connections to smaller settlements, either by bolstering the existing civilian infrastructure or creating their own. After yesterday's battle, there seemed to be no serious obstacles in the division's path. Some of the other divisions, however, were not faring that well. Soul Reaper seemed a bit tired as she spoke from the screen, explaining that there was a bit of a problem. She reported that a Category 3 gate was blocking their way, guarded by a powerful corrupted creature that was at least a devil, possibly a tyrant. She said Winter couldn't handle it alone, and that since Sunny and she were the closest, he should separate from his division and move southeast at full speed until he reached the rendezvous point about 70 kilometers away from his current position. Sunny briefly studied the map, then said hesitantly, asking whether she was sure the three of them could manage killing a corrupted tyrant. All corrupted abominations were frightening, but a tyrant. The thought of facing one in battle made Sunny feel ill at ease. He had only ever fought one creature of that rank, the Wormvine. Even then, he had only killed the vile monster by slaying its host with the Aider's wooden knife. Of course, Sunny had been a mere awakened back then. He was much more powerful now. But what truly disturbed him was the lack of information. Fighting an enemy after studying it for a while was completely different from going in blind. He probably had a slim chance against a corrupted tyrant if there was ample time to prepare. As it stood, though, Master Jet did not seem to share his concerns. She grinned darkly and then shook her head, telling him the three of them was enough, but that this time they wouldn't be fighting alone. Someone else would be joining the fun. Sunny raised an eyebrow. He asked who. Soul Reaper leaned forward a little. Jet replied that it was a saint. The first evacuation army was accompanied by 3 saints. One was loyal to the government, while the other two had been sent by the great clans. Unofficially, Valor and Song had refused to participate in the Southern Quadrant campaign. Officially, however, they still had to keep up appearances. For that reason, each had provided a token force to support the evacuation effort, and the 2 saints in question were in charge of these forces. Sunny did not know who these transcendent were. All he knew was that the government had wisely chosen to separate them, sending one to East Antarctica while the other ended up in the Antarctic Center. And now, apparently, that latter was coming to aid the irregulars in vanquishing a powerful corrupted abomination. He was not sure how to feel about that. On one hand, the help of a saint was more than welcomed. On the other hand, one of the reasons he had decided to participate in the Antarctica campaign was to get away from the great clans and their machinations. Now, it seemed that he just couldn't escape coming in contact with the sovereigns and their forces. Sunny cursed it all. With a sigh, Sunny sent Luster the coordinates of the rendezvous point and walked over to the pilot's cabin. He told Luster they had new orders and to get to the location as fast as possible. The young man yawned, studied the coordinates for a bit, and then nodded, acknowledging the order. He lingered for a moment, then asked by the way what was there. Sunny shrugged with a nonchalant expression, mentioning that it was a corrupted tyrant, something like that. Luster paled, stared at him with wide eyes, and suddenly grew very quiet. Rhino left the marching formation of the division and accelerated forward, quickly overtaking slower vehicles. Then it made a sharp turn, left the wide highway entirely, and entered uneven terrain. Its massive wheels easily rolled through mud and rocks. Thanks to the high-tech suspension system, the members of the cohort barely felt any disturbance. In the next several hours, the armored vehicle briskly traversed the wild expanse of the Antarctic Center. Powerful spotlights installed on the rhino's roof flooded the landscape in front of it with stark light, cutting the dimness with wide beams. Various sensors supplied Luster with additional information to better steer the heavy carrier. The Antarctic Center was very different from the wilderness of Asia that Sunny had seen during his brief train ride. It was just as lifeless, but in a different manner. There were fewer signs of past wars and disasters here, but at the same time, the land somehow seemed even more desolate. It was much more uneven and mountainous too. Basically, most of the landmass was covered by a vast mountain chain. Because of that, the horizon was obscured most of the time. And it was hard to notice any approaching threats. More than that, the landscape itself looked strange and alien. Well, no surprise. After all, Antarctica had been covered by ice for millions of years, and only recently shrugged off its heavy veil. The passing of monumental glaciers had left many strange things behind. The rhino was doing an amazing job of navigating the complicated terrain. It moved toward the rendezvous point with sufficient speed, sometimes making use of existing roads, sometimes cutting through untouched wilderness. It climbed or descended tall hills and mountain outcroppings, traversed stretches of frozen marshlands, and waded through labyrinths of giant boulders with equal ease. If there was one thing that kept Sunny tense, it was that he rarely had an opportunity to see far ahead. These days, the southern quadrant was not as lifeless as it had used to be. The life that was spreading through its reaches, however, was not the kind anyone in the waking world would welcome. Eventually, he sighed and climbed on the rhino's roof through one of the upper hatches. Since Samara was yet to return from the dream realm, Sunny was the only member of the cohort with decent means of ranged attack. Using the open lid of the hatch to shield himself from the cold winds, Sunny summoned Morgan's warbow and peered into the dimness that surrounded the moving vehicle. In the next few hours, he had to use his bow 3 times. Several stray abominations wandered into the rhino's path, only to be slain by a swift black arrow before having the chance to approach it. Luckily, none of them turned out to be too powerful or laid a dangerous ambush. Sunny murmured that it was just for now. By noon, which of course looked the same as morning, evening, and night, the rhino reached the ruins of a small outpost where 2 similar carriers were parked in the shadow of a broken wall. A handful of people could be seen gathered around a fire having a cozy meal. As Luster stopped the vehicle, Sunny jumped off the roof and walked toward the fire. Orange light gleamed, reflecting from the bleak metal of his armor. He asked what they were drinking. The members of Queen's and Soul Reaper's cohort looked at him with wistful expressions. One of them replied that it was just hot water, sir, explaining that the cargo capacity of their carriers was limited so they couldn't bring anything better. He shook his head, then summoned the covetous coffer. As the large chest manifested itself into reality and opened its toothy maw, Sunny thrust his hand inside, and then threw a can of instant coffee and an expensive chocolate bar to the startled Awakened. The Awakened thanked him profusely. The bunch of irregulars did not look like people who were about to fight a corrupted abomination of a high class. They seemed relaxed and nonchalant about the whole ordeal, and paid more attention to the can of coffee than to a menacing mountain that loomed above them. The Category 3 gate was situated on its peak. As the grateful Awakened brewed coffee for themselves and Sunny's soldiers, who emerged from the rhino and joined them, he looked around and noticed Master Jet and Winter. The 2 were standing some distance away, discussing something between themselves in low voices. He headed toward them and caught the tail end of their conversation. Jet was insisting that Mongrel was definitely a woman and hot as hell, too. At that moment, Sunny approached them, glanced at Master Jet, and then cleared his throat. Winter stared at him for a moment. Jet declared that this was her case in point. As Sunny pondered what she alluded to, Master Jet smiled and waved at him. She greeted Sunny, telling him he was just on time and that the Saint should be arriving any moment now, too. He couldn't help but frown. Sunny asked who exactly was coming. At that moment, a vaguely familiar feeling suddenly overwhelmed him. Sunny sensed a massive shadow covering the ruined outpost, and then heard a sound that resembled the rustle of 1,000 wings. Suddenly, a 4th figure was standing among them. Sunny blinked, momentarily lost for words. He stammered, asking Saint Tyris what she was doing here. In front of him stood none other than Sky Tide of the White Feather clan. The woman standing in front of Sunny was tall and slender, with long hair that fell down in a gentle cascade of pale gold. Her posture was perfectly straight, and her cold face was dazzlingly beautiful. Sky Tide was wearing a suit of light steel armor, with pauldrons and greaves decorated with stylized feathers. The gaze of her stern amber eyes was piercing and heavy, while her strange vertical pupils resembled that of a bird of prey. Snowflakes swirled and danced in the air as if trying to get closer to her. Sunny was rather startled to see the familiar transcendent.
Tyris, what are you doing here?
Master Sunless, it is good to see you again. I am glad to find you in good health. As for why I am here, isn't it obvious? I have come to hunt the beast.
No, I meant why are you here in Antarctica?
White Feather Clan has been tasked with supporting the evacuation effort in the southern quadrant.
Oh. Suddenly, a few things clicked into place. Back when Sky Tide had killed Saint Cormac to protect Sunny and Cassie, she told them that she would be punished by the great clan Valor. She had also told them that they would not dare to penalize her too severely. It seemed that having the chained isles taken away was not enough of a punishment for the willful saint. Valor had to make a gesture by sending a token force to Antarctica. And so, the White Feather Clan had drawn the short straw. It seemed that they had lost their idyllic domain and were banished to the cold reaches of the war-torn continent, at least for the time being. Looking around, Sunny suppressed a sad sigh. The dark and inhospitable land surrounding them was a far cry from the Empyrean beauty of the sanctuary of Noctis. He felt a bit guilty about the whole thing. Sky Tide did not seem to mind, though, or at least hid her displeasure perfectly. Master Jet, meanwhile, looked at them with curiosity.
Ah, I have forgotten that the two of you know each other. In any case, we are grateful for your assistance, Saint Tyris.
Sky Tide simply nodded. Soon, the gaze of her striking amber eyes drifted to the tall mountain looming above the ruined outpost.
What do we know about the enemy?
Then she smiled and looked at the youngest member of the group. Do your thing. Do your thing. What kind of request is that? As Sunny grumbled silently, his shadows nimbly scaled the slopes of the mountain. By now, the range of shadow control had exceeded 12 kilometers, so it was not impossible for them to reach the peak. There was hardly anyone better suited to spy on the corrupted abomination. However, Sunny grimaced as the call of the nightmare assaulted his mind. Now that he was observing a Category 3 gate, its subtle influence grew much stronger and harder to ignore. There was a wide crack that had almost split the peak of the mountain in two. The dark rift of the gate pulsed inside the cavernous schism, and there was stone debris littering the immediate area around it. Many shards had rolled down the steep slopes, while a few giant boulders had even reached all the way down. Smashing large parts of the outpost, the irregulars were currently hiding in and decimating the road that led to it. Strangely, he did not notice the nightmare creatures immediately. It was only after the creepy shadow, true to its name, crept closer that a sudden shiver ran through his body. Sunny noticed hundreds of shapes resting between the rocks. The abominations were easy to miss because their carapaces were as white as the snow covering the top of the mountain and had a texture that resembled rock. They looked like giant insects that were as large as adult humans. Some of them were awakened, some were fallen, and a few larger ones were even corrupted. None of them could compare to the enormous abomination hiding in the shadow of the shattered peak, however. With its smooth, milky-white chitin and unmoving black eyes, the jade creature resembled an oversized, appalling, monstrous beetle. It was easily 3 times the size of the rhino. With 6 mighty legs and terrifying mandibles that seemed powerful enough to crush heavily armored war platforms, looking at the motionless abomination, Sunny suddenly felt an eerie sense of foreboding. He glanced at Saint Tyris, Master Jet, and Winter with a dark expression.
Tyrant, all right, large, thick armor, resembles an insect. There are around 500 drones under its command, many of them fallen. I've noticed at least 24 corrupted lieutenants as well.
He lingered for a moment and then called out. The seer of his cohort activated her aspect ability, allowing him to see the swarm of stone beetles in a new light. Studying their tough carapaces, Sunny slowly listed a few vulnerable points, then shifted his gaze to the Tyrant. Unlike its minions, the giant white beetle did not seem to possess any pronounced weak spots. Sunny did not know whether the armor of the powerful creature was that good or whether Kim simply could not peer through the defenses of an enemy that outranked and outclassed her so much, but the result was the same. Killing the Tyrant was not going to be easy. He shared what little information he had been able to gather and glanced at the other officers with doubt. St. Tyris remained silent, but Master Jet smiled. Her smile was dark and vicious. Soul Reaper waited for a few moments, then looked at Sky Tide. The Transcendent crossed her arms.
I will handle the Tyrant. As long as it's bound to the ground, I can attack the creature with impunity. If one attack doesn't crack its shell, 10 will. If 10 attacks fail, 100 will do the job.
She looked at the irregulars and frowned.
However, you will have to deal with its retinue. That task is not going to be easy.
Winter snorted and then suddenly laughed. He barked the question of what was so easy about any of it. They did not spend too much time trying to come up with a detailed plan. Firstly, because the nightmare creatures could have discovered the irregulars at any moment. Secondly, because no plan they could come up with would have been reliable. There was just too little information at their disposal, without knowing what the Tyrant, the few devils serving it, and the lesser soldiers of the stone hive were capable of. What was the point of creating rigid strategies? The battle ahead was going to be decided by raw power, resolve, and ability to swiftly adapt to changing circumstances. Luckily, the irregulars had more than enough power at their disposal. With 3 elite masters and an actual saint leading them, there was hardly a more fearsome human force in the Antarctic center. Would that power be enough, though? They were going to find out soon. How did I end up here? Creeping up the slope of the mountain with a morose expression, Sunny bitterly remembered his dreams of becoming a rich, decadent, cowardly shop owner. What was he doing on a continent drowning in nightmare gates, preparing to battle a corrupted tyrant and its army? He could have been relaxing in the hot springs of a luxurious spa with a bunch of beauties right now. That was what rich people did, right? Instead, Sunny hid behind a tall boulder, shivered in the cold, and glanced at the handful of people pressing against rocks around him. Sure, there were plenty of beauties among them as well. But it wasn't the same. It couldn't be more different, really. Damn. There was still a good stretch of the mountain slope remaining until the peak. That high, the air was not devoid of oxygen yet, but it surely tasted different. None of the awakened would be hindered by the slight hypoxia or suffer from the high-altitude illness, of course, but it still required some adjustment. Sunny sighed and watched as St. Tyris calmly walked forward. A swarm of sparks surrounded her hand and then coalesced into a long javelin. At the same time, Winter summoned a strange silver bow and 2 arrows. She knocked one on the string of the bow and waited. A shadow hiding at the peak of the mountain watched as one of the hideous insects wandered to the edge of a protruding rock outcropping and froze, its long antennae twitching in the wind. Sunny frowned.
I think we're noticed.
Before he could warn anyone, however, Sky Tide took one last step, raised her javelin, and silently threw it into the dark sky. Her throw caused the snow around St. Tyris to be cleared away by the gale of crushing wind. The rocks beneath her feet cracked. In the next moment, a thunderous roar of a sonic boom rolled across the mountains as the javelin accelerated toward the peak with terrifying speed. It streaked across the sky like a radiant star, and then collided against the Tyrant's carapace with devastating force. The milky-white chitin did not shatter, though. The javelin shattered instead. As St. Tyris tilted her head a little, Winter shot an arrow almost straight up. It flew into the sky and then exploded with brilliant radiance, flooding the gloomy slope with bright light. Illuminated by it, the nightmare creatures hiding behind the rocks moved. They ran forward with surprising agility and then jumped, twisting their bodies into tight spheres. Hundreds of these spheres then rolled down, approaching the hiding irregulars like with terrible speed. Sunny felt his heart growing heavy. Because of how similar the carapaces of the stone hive soldiers were to actual rock, It seemed as if the mountain itself was falling on them. And that wasn't all. The tyrant moved forward and opened its maw, disgorging a cloud of darkness from it. The cloud flowed down like an avalanche of volcanic ash, swallowing the figures of rolling drones as it overtook them. Sunny did not know what the black avalanche consisted of, but his intuition was screaming that inhaling, or even being touched by the black ash, was deadly to humans. At that moment, Sky Tide suddenly disappeared, and a massive shape shot forward from their formation. A giant bird of prey with white feathers and talons forged of lustrous steel appeared above the mountain, gaining speed as it flew into the sky. Her body was wreathed in a radiant mantle of dancing lightning bolts. As St. Tyris moved her enormous wings, the cloud of black ash was torn apart by the hurricane winds and dissipated long before reaching the irregulars. She soared high into the dim sky and then plummeted down, aiming to savage the jade beetle with her terrifying beak. The two monstrous creatures collided, and the tyrant jumped back with an ear-piercing screech. A beam of darkness escaped from its maw. But Sky Tide was already rising into the sky as she circled to deliver another devastating attack. The bolts of lightning gathered on her body and then shot forward, colliding with the dark beam. It seemed to weaken considerably and missed the swift saint, disappearing into the somber expanse of cold heavens. A net of lightning descended from above and bit into the milky-white jade chitin of the tyrant. A devastating thunderclap battered it like a physical attack. Tyris folded her wings and fell down again, leaving deep grooves on the enemy's armor with her talons. The whole mountain shook from the ferocious force of their clash. Comparatively uninjured, but hopelessly outmatched by the flying opponent, the jade beetle seemed almost aggrieved. Its black eyes stared at the silhouette of the colossal bird with an indescribable, inhuman emotion. And then the tyrant straightened. Its carapace suddenly seemed to split in the middle and move aside like a giant gate. From beneath it, 4 long, translucent wings emerged and then blurred, causing the massive creature to rise into the air. It would have been an eerily beautiful image, if it wasn't so dreadful. Looking from below, Sunny gritted his teeth.